Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Barenaked Health Podcast. On the line today, I have Ryan Sprague with Highly Optimized, right? Ryan, welcome to the show. If you wouldn't mind kind of giving us a rundown, sharing us with some of your history, kind of what you got you into this space, please.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, so much for having me on, and thank you to all the listeners tuning in. Podcasting is one of my favorite things of all time, and so anytime I get to do it, I'm really excited. And I'd love to give some context around like how I got to this screen today and why I focus around cannabis. I think for a lot of plant medicine enthusiasts, cannabis is kind of looked at the thing you do in college, and then you kind of give it up for the real deal psychedelics. And I am here to blow that hypothesis to smithereens, if you will. And so basically, for me, when I was growing up, I always knew there was more to reality than I was told. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know where to find it, but I just knew there was, I don't know, some different scenes of reality that I had yet to experience. And I think a lot of us that are seekers and come to be seekers later on in life kind of resonate with that, for what it's worth when childhood and things like that. I had an amazing childhood. Really shout out to my parents for just acing that process. No one's perfect, but they did a really good job. And, when I was around 15 to 16, I got into high school and I started experiencing what I would call generalized anxiety disorder. And I went to a doctor, and in a matter of 5 minutes, this doctor diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder and told me that I then had anxiety. And so, as a result of that, foreshadowing what was to come, I started creating stories around what was possible for me as someone who was diagnosed with anxiety. I was a budding musician at those ages, really excited about guitar and getting into bands and playing live. And I was really nervous around playing live, getting on stages and things like that. And so after I had this diagnosis, I started to have it prevent me from doing things, or I chose to allow it to prevent me from doing things. Oh, I can't do that. I have anxiety. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of us can resonate with these diagnoses we get, then start to box us into what is possible as someone, let's say with anxiety, for example. And so around this time, I started trying some pharmaceuticals recommended by my doctor or prescribed by my doctor. And I was promised the world with every one I tried. That every single one was going to fix me and I was going to be totally fine. And what ended up happening was I actually felt much less like myself, much more dissociated, much more kind of just neutral and just there existing. And, I was talking to a friend about this, and again, I never remember how this conversation exactly went in words of a 16-year-old or two 16-year-olds, but generally I was explaining this to this individual, and he mentioned that he experienced something similar and used cannabis for it. And at this point, Nick, I had grown up in the war on drugs, DARE program, this is your brain on drugs. And so I really thought cannabis was going to rot my brain. I, did not see myself ever using drugs or alcohol or anything. And so I was very reluctant. But after a couple other rounds with different pharmaceuticals that made me feel even worse, I figured, well, what do I have to lose? So I tried it. And the first couple of times I may have Bill Clintoned it. I'm not sure exactly because I didn't really feel any effects. But the third time was the charm. And in that experience, first of all, I went very far out or very far inward, depending on how you look at it. And I had this knowing, this clear cognizant knowing that I was not my thoughts. And so I didn't know what to do with that information. I just knew that experience changed me because after that, I didn't see myself as someone who had anxiety. I saw myself as someone who was experiencing sensations that a lot of people agreed on equaled anxiety. And so that really started my ability to be a seeker because once I realized that not only did cannabis not kill me or not rot my brain, but it actually gave me a whole new lease on life. It gave me my life back. It gave me my power back. I started asking myself, well, if I've been lied to about that, what else have I been lied to? And so I went down the conspiracy alleyway. I watched a lot of, Zeitgeist and a lot of Ben Stewart's films and things of that nature. And I started to really wake up to this truth of who and what we truly are as divine beings living a human experience. And so at this point, we're getting around 17 to 18 years old. And I ended up going to school for psychology because I was fascinated with the mind after going through my own challenges with it. And right around this time, I started to realize about year 1.5 to 2 that I would have to go to school for at least 8 years to get a PhD if I wanted to make any real money or have my own practice or anything as a therapist or psychologist or even psychiatrist. And so I started to realize I'm not really meant to be wearing khakis. All right. Like, for anyone that knows me personally, I'm usually in a tank top and short shorts or just short shorts. I really enjoy being very free range of motion. I'm a very big fitness addict. And so at the end of the day, I started to have a dark night of the soul present itself, which was I really feel like my whole life I felt as though I was lazy and didn't have good work ethic because I didn't want to do things that I wasn't passionate around. But at that age, I didn't have any examples of people that were telling me, like, yeah, you shouldn't do anything you don't want to do. It was more of the opposite. People saying, well, you just get a job and it pays the bills and yada, yada. And that seemed like death to me. And so
That's what most people go through. It's wild.
yeah. And it's the norm, right? It's
Yeah.
normalized. And for whatever reason, I think I could speak to my human design for a second. I'm a projector. And so projectors in human design, we have limitless energy if we're doing what we really want to be doing. But if we're not doing what we want to be doing, we have literally a big fat zero in our energy department. And so a lot of my friends that were working at jobs like Staples and things like that at those ages, maybe weren't a projector. I'm not sure. It didn't seem to kill their soul like it killed mine. And so around that time, I went to the Boston Freedom Rally, which before cannabis was legalized here was a much bigger deal. It's pretty much a legalized event. And everyone comes into the Boston Commons and connects with cannabis. And as long as you're not selling or doing anything crazy, the cops don't bother you. So I went there and I forgot my glasses. And I usually don't wear sunglasses anymore, but at those ages I did. And so as a result, with my blue eyes, I got out of the tunnel and I couldn't really see anything. Like it was like very bright outside. So I was kind of like, oh, like this. But I heard a guy yelling, "Who wants to make butter with me?" So I wandered, kind of followed his voice over to his tent, and he was passing out a pamphlet for a new cannabis school opening about 10 minutes from where I was living at the time. So this is one of the first times, Nick, and I'm sure your listeners can understand this, that I felt a fuck yes coming from my heart. I knew I'm like, whatever this is, I want to be a part of this. So
Yeah.
I went home and told my dad, and as a broke college student, I asked him for help on tuition. It was like $500, it wasn't anything crazy. And he ended up deciding to come with me. He wasn't a cannabis enthusiast himself, but he had seen how much it had helped me. He had seen how much it had helped me with my anxiety. And when I went through I don't know, a mortality crisis, if you will, when I was 17 and woke up peeing blood one day, he brought me to the hospital. And while we were on the way there, he asked me, "Son, are you doing any drugs?" And so
Mhm.
I said, "No, but I am smoking a shit ton of pot," is exactly how I said it. And because at that point, here I was in this, certain story in my life of having anxiety and all these things. I connect with cannabis. All of a sudden, I have the walls open up around me. And so I made the mistake that many people do. And I kept thinking that I needed more cannabis to access that magic. I kept mistaking the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. And so I'll come back to that in just a moment. But at this point, my dad had seen how much it helped for me or helped with my, anxiety and things like that. So he ends up coming to school with me and we start learning about the science, the pharmacology, the history, the cultivation, all these different aspects of cannabis. And I ended up spending about 2 to 3 years at the school. I ended up interning for them, and I remember asking my dad, like, "Dad, I'm really passionate about this." And he was like, "Well, listen, if this is what you want to do, be the first one in, last one out, be the teacher's pet, do whatever you got to do." Because this was 2011. There was news of medical cannabis being passed here. We had decriminalization at that point, but there was no cannabis industry here. And I knew that I didn't want to wear khakis the rest of my life. So I was like, this is my way out. Okay. And so basically, when I got done interning, one of the things that I realized the school was doing kind of as part of their nonprofit sector was helping cancer patients treat and cure their own cancer with the aid of cannabis. So
Mhm.
this is something a lot of people don't know about, especially back in 2011. It was very woo-woo to say that. But now you can go on PubMed and actually look up scientific studies of THC killing cancer cells, CBD inhibiting their growth, and many other compounds and things in the plant helping that process as well. And so, this was really cool information to learn. It was really fun to see these clients come in with scans of tumors and whatever else was growing in their body and coming in a series of months or a year later with no visible tumors in their body. And we have one of the best cancer centers in the country here, Dana-Farber, if you believe in the Western med, model of cancer treatment. And so these people were perplexed. They kept asking these people, "What are you doing?" And they were like, "Well, we're interacting with something called RSO, which stands for Rick Simpson oil." So when I talk about cannabis curing cancer, I'm not talking about smoking it. All right. Smoking is great for other things, but when you're looking to cure cancer or autoimmune disorders or things like that, you want to be interacting with a very consolidated and concentrated form, and you want to be ingesting it instead of inhaling it. And so that's essentially what RSO is. Rick Simpson is the gentleman that brought this into the mainstream. Any one of your listeners can look up the Phoenix Tears organization if they want a lot of different stories. I also know a doctor personally who has the coolest name ever. Her name is Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper Hernandez. And she cured her own cancer just juicing cannabis leaves back in 2010. And so, again, there's a lot out there people don't know about cannabis, and we're going to demystify a lot of it today in this conversation. But after a couple of years of interning there and learning these different processes and whatever, this whole idea of cancer came very close to home for me. My dad ended up getting diagnosed with terminal cancer, and by the time he had found it, or they had found it, it had spread all throughout his body. And I knew that my dad wasn't going to survive it necessarily because he didn't want to stop doing all the things that gave him cancer in the first place. He didn't want to do a lot of the inner work and things like that. But I figured, if I can help my dad ease his pain in his time of need, that'll be a benefit for me. And so he was very reluctant. This is a guy that had only connected with cannabis once in his life, and it was in the 80s, and him and his first wife connected with a joint and heard a cop siren like 3 blocks away, knew that the cops were coming for them and hid under their dining room table for hours. All right. So my dad didn't have a really positive view around how cannabis affected him. He was passionate around it for the reasons that he had seen with me, but he had not been trying it this whole time he was at the school. He was a very sober type individual. And so I end up giving him some of this RSO that we turned our last harvest into because we had started growing together as a little father-son project. Now that it was legal medically, I had a medical card. And so we turned it into RSO from what I had learned from the school, and I started administering it to him. And what I thought was going to happen, Nick, was that he would need help to the bathroom and I would help him get up, that he may have questions, that I would watch movies with him. But what actually happened during that time was something I did not expect, and it took me years to put it together, which was a complete reduction in the physical armor that most of us walk around life wearing, especially men, but women too, right? We walk around with kind of this very tightly wound armor, almost like a corset. And when my dad connected with this medicine for the first time, I witnessed all of that go away. And I got to talk directly with my dad's most divine aspects of self, his higher self, his heart, his soul. And I got to witness him create closure with his other children, my half brother and my half sister, my mother, myself, most importantly, himself, his own mortality. We got to talk about so many deep topics like what he thought happened after death. And, we got to talk about it almost as a celebration. And so my dad was diagnosed July 9th and given until Halloween at best. He ended up surviving until the following June. And during that time, we got to have a lot of conversations and moments with each other that most children don't get to have with their parents before they pass away. Now, again, while I was in this, I didn't really realize all this. It was after he passed where I started realizing I don't feel that fucked up about my dad being dead. I just don't. Like, sure, I wish he was still here. I miss him. I go through my moments, but I'm not haunted by it like many people are. I had witnessed other family members when they lost people, it crippled them. And it really scared me about the idea of death, to be honest. But when my dad passed, it felt like he was just still here with me, just in non-physical form anymore. And so after that, I had a fire lit under my ass. I didn't know what I just experienced, but it was something very different than everything I had learned about the plant. And I had learned some amazing stuff. I mean, talk about curing cancer holistically. That's like amazing. But this made that pale in comparison. And so I started to wonder, like, what else can this plant do that is not talked about in any of the science, the medical, the pharmacology, or any of these more left brain type systems? So I ended up working at a dispensary after that for 5 years and being a holistic health nut myself. I started when patients would come in complaining that cannabis that they had bought before was not working. They would have to up their amounts, any of these kind of things. I just started asking questions. I would ask them things like, how much water are you drinking? What's your circadian rhythm health like? What's your movement like? Are you doing things that are, satiating your endocannabinoid system? Are you interacting with things like olive oil or flaxseed or any of these things that naturally replenish, the lack of endocannabinoids that many people have in their ACS, their endocannabinoid system? And so I was just doing this. It wasn't a master plan I had. It was just something I started doing. And what I started finding was people would come back in and be like, wow, that thing you said really worked. Now cannabis is working way better for me. So I kind of tabled that. I didn't really, again, have a master plan with it, but I was like, oh, this is very interesting that this is happening. And so after 5 years of working at the dispensary, we got bought out by a very big corporate company. And all of a sudden, the smell of khakis and office supplies and everything started getting back into my reality. And I realized I needed to eject those CETO out of there. So I ended up starting my business, Highly Optimized, in 2019. And that whole process is a big story as well. I went through a full-on Kundalini awakening in December of 2019. I went out to MJ BizCon and I went out there to find my own investors and bring love grown cannabis to the world, start talking about the spiritual aspect of it more. And when I went out there, all I found was people that were very left brained. You know, how many grams per square foot can you grow me? What bloom boosters do you use? And I'm like, I don't use any of that. I grow organically. Oh, that doesn't yield as much. We don't want to even talk to you about that. I'm like, okay. So on one of the last nights there, you know, I was with my girlfriend, who's still my girlfriend today. And, you know, she was in the industry as well. And we were kind of talking about like, what do we want to do when we go home? We want to quit this job, but we were coming out here. It's like our master plan to find investors, open our own dispensary. That's what we thought we wanted to do at the time. And now we just feel like really messed up because now we're realizing like, uh-oh, it's not just out in Massachusetts. These corporations are buying out mom and pop businesses. It's all over the country. And this kind of seems like the way that the industry is going. So my girlfriend, shout out to the best girlfriend award ever. I was like, hey, you know, what do you want to do tonight? You know, you want to get an early night in? You know, what are you feeling? And she was like, well, why don't we take some MDMA and go hit a strip club? I was like, okay. And I had never been to a strip club in my life, swear to God. She had never been to one in her life, swear to God. So it was kind of like, we're just having fun in Vegas. So I lost all expectations, Nick, at that point. I was going out to party. I was going out to have some fun. So we take some Molly, we get in a limo, we go to a strip club, and we get in there, and the strippers definitely knew something was up. You know, we're rolling really good. And we're just talking to them about their life plans. They're like, hey, do you want a lap dance? I'm like, whatever. But like, hey, like, how'd you start working here? Like, what's your master plan? So they ended up liking us quite a bit. They were like, hey, like, you know, we'll hang out with you guys a little
Because they
longer and
could actually
everything.
just talk to you, right?
Yeah, yeah. They were like, you guys aren't here for what most people are here for. You know, we were kind of like fish out of water. You know, it probably looked like a bunch of 10-year-olds going into a strip club. Like, we had no idea what to do with that. And that's not really like our vibe. We're not really like, you know, I'm not that kind of guy and she's not that kind of girl. So we just went there to have some fun. You know, the club was open late. So we were like, maybe we'll meet some cool people. And we did. We met some great strippers and, you know, we were having just great, really deep philosophical talks with them. And one thing that ended up happening was Rachel told me, hey, just get us home by 4 a.m., you know, keep track of the time for me. And, you know, I was excited. I was in there having great conversations, you know, watching Rachel light up at, you know, great conversations and everything. And I looked down at my phone at one point, expecting to see, you know, 3:30. Oh, great. We'll get a cab ride home. We'll be back at 4. It'll be great. And what I saw was 7:38 a.m. And I'm like, oh, shit. No wonder everyone looks like they're about to leave right now. And so our flight was later on that day. And Rachel had a big application she was working on, taking some side work for an Illinois dispensary that was opening up. So she was writing a lot of the legalese and shit like that. Talk about boring. Oh my God, the most boring thing ever. So she was going to be working on that on the plane ride to get it done on time. So when I told her it was 7:38 a.m., she went through a period of frustration, rightfully so, and I dropped the ball. And you know, the next thing is not something that again I had a master plan about. I didn't know. I had no idea. But because of that hard open state, I was able to take full accountability and be like, yeah, I'm sorry, I really messed this up. Typically, I'd be like, well, we were both having fun and things like that. So I accepted full accountability. And when I did that, I felt something shift inside of me. But I figured, I'm like, well, I took MDMA. I'm on drugs, you know, like who knows what this is, but I'm just going to kind of table it for now and whatever. So the next day we're on the plane and I'm like, got like 2 hours of sleep. And, you know, I'm kind of in and out of consciousness and I'm talking to my soul through a process that Paul Chek had taught in his holistic lifestyle coaching program I had taken a couple of months before that. And I started asking my soul, I'm like, hey, what was that thing that happened last night at the strip club? And my body was like, well, that was you feeling emotions. And I was like, what do you mean? I feel emotions all the time. And my soul was like, what kind of emotions do you usually feel? And I was like, well, happiness, euphoria, excitement, joy. And my soul was like, do you notice anything about all those emotions you just listed? And I was like, yeah, they're all the emotions I want to feel. And my soul was like, yeah, see, you think there's good and bad emotions. And so because of that, you've been numbing out the bad ones, the quote unquote bad ones, by unconsciously interacting with cannabis. So when I got that download, I was like, oh my God. I went home and I just decided to say, fuck it. And I just quit. And I didn't know like if I was going to leave the industry. I didn't know if I was going to be a cannabis user anymore. I didn't know anything. All I knew was that as soon as I quit, I started feeling a lot of emotions. A lot started coming back into my life. And all the things that I had been annoyed by, like, oh, this job, I don't know what to do. All those things got really, really strong and present in my life. And so I couldn't avoid them anymore because I didn't have a protector to hide them from me anymore. Because what I would typically do is feel all the frustration all day of like, oh, I want to leave this job, then come home, soothe myself with cannabis, and it was like Groundhog Day, over and over and over. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that, just using the plant to survive rather than learning how to thrive with it. So I went home.
But you can enter cannabis alcohol, like
Yeah,
whatever, right? Like
nicotine, whatever it is.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
literally food, exercise, even like literally whatever it is. And I'm glad you mentioned that because again, it's not about cannabis and it never was. And that's something we can get to later about why I don't believe in the typical addiction model. But basically, I took a 90-day break. And during that time, I quit the job, started my business, started my podcast, and I met a guy named Mark England. And Mark England is a guy I heard on a podcast years before. And I really liked what he was talking about, with his definition or really redefinition of abracadabra. With my word, I create. That's the real definition. But really, what he was talking about was how language architects our reality and how the stories that run in the background of our lives dictate the experience of reality we have as the creator of our reality that we each are. And so I really vibed with it when I listened to it. And when I was going through my Kundalini awakening, because when I got home and I quit cannabis, this Kundalini awakening emerged for me. And I didn't even know it was a Kundalini awakening until some years back when I met a guy named Aaron Abke who specializes in that. And he was like, yeah, did you have fire veins? I'm like, totally, dude. My hands were like on fire. My arms were on fire all night. I couldn't sleep. He's like, yeah, that's a Kundalini awakening. I mean, I was crying at song. I mean, it was hilarious, honestly, if I look back at that time. But it propelled me forward. And so during a post I was making on Facebook at that point, I was talking about perspective, no spacing, just long ass post. And I put this post out and someone commented saying, hey, where'd you learn that language stuff? And I talked about, oh, I met this guy, Mark England. I saw him on a podcast one time and I just tagged him. And he sent me a voice note later, told me about his program, his coaching program, asked me if I had ever thought about being a coach. And I hadn't at the time. I didn't even really know what he was talking about, but something in me said to say yes. So I did. And all of a sudden I got into the Enlifted program and that changed my life forever. That's when all my love for psychology came back in, but allowed me to wear a tank top because I'm a coach, right? Not a therapist. And so I ended up getting into that program. And then about a month after that, the pandemic hit. So now I had all this time. And, there's so many different aspects of this, but I'll kind of breeze through this part because I know I've been on this soapbox for a little while. But, at the end of the day, meeting Mark really catalyzed everything because then I started going down to his house and hanging out with other coaches. And I would bring my cannabis that I grew down there with biogeometry and Korean natural farming. And I thought I was kind of putting cannabis behind me and I was going to be this mindset coach. But when I came down there, all everyone was interested in was asking me about the cannabis I was growing. They're like, dude, this is so crazy. And so I started educating a lot of people. And I remember a woman named Kim Kesting who worked with Lifted for a long time. The first time I ever met her, she immediately was like, have you ever thought about being a cannabis coach? Like, is that even a thing? Like, I feel like I could use that. And so we did an appointment right there in Mark's kitchen and it went great. But I still was like, I'm going to be a mindset coach. Just kind of avoided it. About 6 months later, I ended up going to a Paul Chek workshop at his house. It was the first one he had done during the pandemic. It was the Zen in the Garden workshop. And I go out there and I meet Shervine from Symbiotica, Kyle Kingsbury, like all these people I looked up to. And when I had taken HLC1, about back in October 2019, I had, when Paul came into the class, everyone was giving him gifts. And I was like, oh shit, I didn't think to bring him anything. So I just gave him a couple grams of my cannabis and was like, oh, I know you smoke weed. So here, have fun.
Give him the best
And
gift we got.
yeah, yeah. And I didn't think anything of it. It wasn't some master plan or anything. But the funny thing was when I went to Zen in the Garden, I was like, hey, I'm going to bring him a full ounce this time. And so I see him walking by himself and I run up to him and I'm like, hey, Paul, I brought this to you. I don't know if you remember me. And he's like, dude, I remember you. You're that kid from that HLC1 class that gave me that pot. He's like, that was amazing. He's like, what are you doing to grow this stuff? Like, tell me everything. He's like, let me get your number. And immediately I'm like, oh my God. Because, Paul is like one of my main idols in life. So here I am having Paul ask me for my number. And I'm like, this is pretty wild. So he tells me, he's like, man, are you teaching this stuff? Because I start telling him a little bit of what I'm doing. He's like, you should really be teaching this. And I'm like, I hadn't really thought about it. But then I go home and I start really, taking on this idea. Like, what if I was a cannabis coach? What would that even be? What would I do? And so over the next couple of years, I built out many different courses and things like that. And after my first course build out, Paul ended up inviting me out to his 60th birthday party at the Rainbow House. So I'm out there with Troy Casey, Raw of Earth, Laurel Erica, who is now passed away, but she was amazing. Shervine, Kyle, like pretty much the who's who. And Paul was like, listen, bring a bunch of your flower out here. I'll tell everyone you're coming and just network your ass off. I'm like, okay, cool. And so Paul's kind of like my cool uncle at this point. He's just always trying to hook me up. And so when I go out there, I make sure I tell him he's painting. There's all these people around him. And I'm like, hey, Paul, I created that course we were talking about, Connect with Cannabis. And he doesn't even look up from his easel. He's like, cool, when do you want to come on Living 4D and talk about it? And I was like, holy shit. Like, because I was like a religious listener of Living 4D. And I was like, man, I'm going to go on Living 4D. So a couple months later, I fly back out there. I do Living 4D. And at the end of that, I don't know if you've ever had a moment, Nick, where you thought you were going to say something, you had it all teed up in your head, and when you go to open your mouth, something totally different comes out. But what I thought I was going to ask him was, do you have any other podcasters that you think I'd be a good guest on? And what came out of my mouth was, can you connect me to Aubrey Marcus? Now, when it came out of my mouth, I thought I was going to puke all over Paul because I did not feel ready for that. But some part of me obviously did. And Paul, once again, didn't even look up from the volcano where he was making a bag. And he was like, sure, I can do that. Just for fair warning, it's a hard podcast to get on. I connected with a lot of people and, not many people actually get on. I was like, no worries, dude. I didn't even
Yeah.
really mean to ask that. So cool, whatever. So a couple of weeks later, I'm on the phone with my friend Jane, who I had met at the dispensary, and she does a lot of work in the Akashic records and things like that with past life regressions. And so she was telling me about a past life regression she had had where she had remembered her and I in Atlantis together, learning to manifest. Now I'm out there, okay? I'm like, all right, tell me more. And so she goes, you still know how to do this. Look how you manifested meeting Paul Chek. Because I would always talk to her at the dispensary about how I love Paul Chek and all this stuff. The second she said check, I get a beep in my phone and it's Paul Chek. And I'm like, that's weird. So I answer it and I'm like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, hey, I thought I'd call you and celebrate. And I'm like, what are we celebrating? He's like, have you checked your email today? I'm like, no. He's like, why don't you go do that? So I checked my email and I realized Aubrey had got back to the message that Paul had sent and was like, hey, I'm in, connect me. And also I had realized Paul sent it out to Josh Trent, Cal Callahan, Luke Story, like pretty much everyone that could have had me on. And most of them were immediately in. So I was like, holy shit. So then I went down, did Aubrey's podcast, gave him the flower, and he had a really negative view around cannabis. So I give him some flower, and when I get down there, he's like, dude, before we hit go, he's like, I gotta ask you, what the fuck are you doing with this cannabis? He's like, I have hated cannabis my whole life. We tried your flower, me and V, and we cannot get enough of it. And when the hell can we get more? And I was like, I brought you some more. And so we hit go on the podcast. We do a great job, in my opinion. I was very nervous, but it didn't show on the podcast, luckily, because I remember my training. But, I was just so happy to have done it. It was a lifelong goal that I got done within a year and a half of starting a business. I thought it was insane. And then that episode went to number one he had ever done. It beat out Joe Dispenza. It beat out RFK. I think right now it's number two in the running next to like some Joe Dispenza podcast he had done with Joe.
Still doing all
So
right.
yeah, which is crazy. I did not expect that because he has amazing guests on. I mean, ayahuasqueros and people with so much experience and other psychedelics. I did not think. I mean, I had a feeling, I had a vision that cannabis was going to blow up like this, but I didn't think it was going to happen that soon. Well, it did, and it put me on the map. And so ever since then, I've been creating the world's largest curriculum of conscious cannabis education, along with experiences as well in our Breathe with Cannabis brand to show people how to turn cannabis into not only just a psychedelic, but a very practical one for where most people are at. Because most people don't have 2 weeks to fly down to a jungle, $10,000 to spend, and then also time for integration. They might have an hour before they got to pick up the kids or before they got to cook dinner. And so cannabis is able to be done through the internet in a very practical setting. It allows you to shift from beta brainwaves into theta, which is the doorway to the subconscious, allows you to start to see what stories are playing in the background of your life that are disempowering and affecting your view of reality. So then you can shift them in rapid time, lock them into the subconscious, and have a totally different new perspective on life. And so that's what I've been teaching ever since. And it's been amazing, dude.
I I think I want to touch on more the shift of reality.
Yeah.
And it's funny you say that because I called a friend last night. I smoked some
Yeah.
cannabis, right?
Mm.
And I started. This was exactly the conversation was actually about reality,
Yeah.
and we were starting to talk more about dreaming, right? And
Mm.
then, well, again, because I'm going pretty deep on this, right? Where it's like, well, dreaming is how is it any different than reality, or is that reality? And again, our conversation is this a dream, right? So
Yep.
then, kind of going through that whole process of that, right? Because I think I want to kind of go here to
Mm.
the cannabis as a psychedelic because
Mm.
to me, yes, we could list all the classic psychedelics,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I still don't like that, and because I still also feel that if I take a drink of water, water can be a psychedelic depending on how you're. conscious of it, what
Mm-hmm.
your reality is framed around it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what I've noticed with just the cannabis that I've been using, because I really just started within the last, I should say, restart, right? Like you said,
Mm.
college, yeah,
Mm.
smoke there, and the experience is different. Doesn't begin to even
Yeah.
start it, right? And we could talk about all of the shit that was in whatever I was smoking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure of it, right? I think people could look up that, but it's like that was not that the marijuana itself was necessarily garbage. It's
Mm.
just everything that went into growing it, as
Yeah.
well as the psyche and the mindset of all the people that went into growing it,
Yeah.
was pure trash, right?
Yeah.
Versus uh, now getting some from the Sacred Smoke Collective, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's
It's
like
a different universe.
reframe. Yes, yes. So I'd like you to maybe start touching on that, like the cannabis as a psychedelic and how that can be just so transformative for people, please.
Yeah. So great question, man. And the first thing I'll say, I did say it before, but I think this is like the ultimate thing that is very 3D based and very simple to understand. And then we'll get into some more, challenging things to potentially understand. But the number one thing is anyone who's done a psychedelic knows the potential of it to radically transform your entire life, radically transform your mental health, radically transform who you see yourself as, how you see reality, what you think reality is. All of that is up for grabs when you connect with any psychedelic. Now, when we look at the state of the world today, which again, if we take on that dreamer point of view, which is, I'm so glad you say that because that's how I look at reality. I look at reality as a dream and only one dreamer here, all right, aka God being the dreamer, and God making the game very interesting by making it seem like there's 8 billion separate selves out there. But again, the myth of separation is just that, it's a myth. And the point of enlightenment or the idea of enlightenment is realizing you've never been separate from God. All right. The point of waking up, if you will, it's another term that we hear a lot these days in the spiritual communities, is the idea that you wake up to the myth that you were never separate from God. You wake up to the myth that you don't need a religion to guide you home because religion is simply rules for a dream that isn't real. And that any non dualistic being like a Jesus or Buddha would only be concerned with one thing, reminding you the dream is not real. They would never be telling you and strengthening the dream by trying to give you a religion to follow or a God in the sky to follow. That's how you can tell right there that a dualist made it, not a non-dualist, all right? So at the end of the day, cannabis is one of the things that is the most practical way and also meets a lot of people where they're at right now. Because think about it. I'm sure, Nick, if you've connected with other psychedelics like I have, I'm sure you've had that thought on 5 grams of mushrooms, like, man, if the whole world could experience this. But at the same time, a lot of the world is still eating McDonald's and drinking tap water. All right. So a lot of people are not equipped with what they would need to even have that be a neutral experience, let alone a beneficial one. So, cannabis, on the other hand, many people are already connecting with it. They already have some sort of relationship with it. And all they need to do is do a couple very simple things. Like, for instance, lay down, put a guided breathwork track on, and go. Or sit in silence for 20 minutes. Or talk to your partner after you've gotten into a conflict while you're connecting with cannabis and see how things shift. You know, these things are very practical to meet most people where they're at.
I want to say something about just the sitting
Yeah.
in silence for 20 minutes because to me that is something. Tell most people to just go sit in silence for 20 minutes and see what happens.
Yeah.
Right? Like so that's why I love that you said that one specifically. I think that's uh there can be just so much good done with that. And this means not silence with like electronics like your phone next
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah.
It means just like lay down on the floor and just be silent.
Yeah, or get out in nature too if you want to be out in
Oh, even
nature,
better, even
you
better. Yeah.
know? Like remind yourself of the truth of what and who you are, which is you are nature, you are God, you are reality, and everyone else and everything else also is. And when you can have that experience, it starts to be much more challenging to be mean to anyone. It starts to be more challenging to even think of someone in a negative way because when you do so, you realize that's actually just me. That's just an unhealed part of me that instead of taking accountability over my own unconscious guilt from the seeming separation from God that never really happened, but the ego tells me happened, right? Instead of doing that, I just project that unconscious guilt onto them. I kind of kick it down the line, but I'm going to have to deal with it at some point. And so cannabis can help remind us of the truth of that while still allowing us to be fully in our humanness. Because one of the things I see in the psychedelic community is a lot of people hitting things like 5-MeO-DMT, bufo, ayahuasca, these really strong medicines all the time. And what I think that is, in part anyway, of course, it's seeking. All right. That's probably what they would say. But what I see is dissociation. It's kind of like, I don't want to be here and I don't know what all this is. So I'm just going to have 8 hours of just not being here. And yeah, those 8 hours may be challenging, but I get led through the challenges instead of having to lead myself through the challenges like in real life. And so it's simpler in a way, not easier, but simpler. And then they come back and their whole life goes back exactly back to the way it was because, again, they don't do anything in that subconscious state because it's very hard to do that when you're on ayahuasca or mushrooms. So they come back expecting the reality to be different. It goes completely back to the way it was. And then they think, oh, I must need more medicine. So cannabis, on the other hand, is something where, let's say you're having a challenge with your partner and you're wondering if you're going to have to break up. You could either go do a ceremony and leave this realm for 8 hours, then come back and have the same arguments, or you guys could actually have a talk while connecting with cannabis and start to figure out your issues. So that way, the changes actually stick. Those states that you're experiencing with cannabis turn into now personality traits that you can take with you. And now your entire experience of reality becomes one which is psychedelic in nature, becomes one where you don't need the medicine all the time to feel these things because you're constantly reminding yourself through the work you're doing. And also, when you're doing this type of work, you start to tune more into your intuition. You start to tune more into your clairsenses, which allows you to find the right people for you that you vibe with, the right places that you want to hang out in, and the right places you want to live in, and the right things you want to be doing. You know, it wakes you up to what purpose I really feel really is. You know, a lot of people out there are seeking their purpose, when in reality, I think we have two purposes. The number one purpose is our inner purpose, which is to wake up to the truth of who and what we truly are as divine beings living out an illusion of a human experience. The outer purpose is wherever that inner purpose leads you. So right now, my outer purpose is to do a podcast with Nick. After this, it'll be to eat some dinner. After that, I'll probably be to play some guitar. After that, it'll be to make sure I get a really good night of sleep. So you can see how going out there and looking for your purpose, right, without this awareness of the inner purpose, kind of gets you all confused. And cannabis can really help you with this because, again, you start to realize that life is cyclical in nature. It just has phases. And at the end of the day, when you start connecting with the plant in this way, you start to wake up your inner essence. And again, is cannabis necessary for that? No, there's many rivers that will lead to the same sea. The only one that's quote unquote wrong is the one that tells you there's only one way to get there. I insert religion, right? Every religion is like, well, this is the only way to get there. Exactly. And that's how you know right off the bat, that's not the path. Because again, anyone, like I can go up against anyone and say completely honestly, yeah, cannabis is not for everyone. If someone doesn't like it, I respect that. Why? Because I don't need them to believe what I believe for me to believe it. But when I go into religion and things like that, it's always people being like, well, I'll pray for you. As if like that's not a silent judgment. It's like, I get what you're doing and it just shows me where you're at. So again, one of the reasons I love plant medicine and psychedelics is because it's much less of all of that type of stuff. There is still some of that in there, but it's a lot more of that kind of stuff. So, you know, again, at the end of the day, one of the things that people don't realize about cannabis is that not all cannabis is grown equally. You know, like you were mentioning in college, a lot of the cannabis that we grew up connecting with was grown on the black market. So a lot of that was grown with people that were in anxiety, in fear, in scarcity, in greed, because they didn't know if they were going to get their doors kicked in. They wanted to make sure that they were pumping the plant full of any chemicals it could to yield more because they didn't have the biggest amount of space to grow in. And so that directly correlates to the actual medicine. The same way that if you have a dog and you raise that dog to be a fighting dog, you know, that dog is going to attack almost anyone, but not because the dog is bad, but because it was bred in a challenging situation or a negative situation. Same with kids, right? Very similar thing. If the parents are assholes, the kid's probably going to be an asshole, but not because the kid was inherently an asshole, because the kid learned to be an asshole through its parents. So at the end of the day, cannabis can become traumatized. Plants can also become traumatized by the energy around them. Now, before any of your listeners go, oh God, he's getting into the woo-woo here, I want you guys to look up a guy named Joe Patitucci who has proven this through his system called Plant Wave. So basically, and he actually does this with cannabis too, if he has a plant in a room and he has someone come in expressing or kind of thinking emotions of hatred or negativity or fear, any of these lower dense emotions, you'll see the electrodes that are hooked up to the plant start allowing the plant to sing a very minor or diminished, out of tune type song. You'll also see the leaves get droopy. Now, let's say Nick walks in and he's expressing emotions of love, he's really joyous. All of a sudden, those same electrodes now start singing a song that is much more in harmony, in key, in a major key, really happy sounding, and the leaves start to perk up. And again, being a grower for the last 18 years, I can tell you this. One of the main reasons in my Grow with Cannabis course, I have in every single week an energy practice and a wisdom and contemplation practice is because I want to teach people that one of the best closed loop systems that you can have to figure out where your psyche's at, how your emotional regulation's doing, is grow a plant and then consume it at the end. Because again, whatever you're consuming and whatever you're experiencing from that consumption is directly you unfiltered. So very similar to if you want to see how good of a parent you're being, go bring your kid around other kids and see how they treat them. Are they sharing? Are they treating them with love? Or are they pushing them over and kicking them in the face, right? Like, that's a way that you can kind of see, look behind the veil if you're man enough or woman enough to actually accept it and look at it really at how good of a job you're doing. And so cannabis growing and cultivation can be a really good positive loop system of that. But that's why Sacred Smoke Collective, for instance, feels so different because the people that are growing it are also people that do inner work. They're people that know to be regulated before they walk into their grow room. They're people that are truly passionate around the plant and the culture of cannabis, not just a Chad or Brad looking to make money, which is what most of the industry is these days. And so again, like that's something that's not talked about nearly often enough, but is a huge factor, way more than how much THC is in it and what funny name does it have. These are the things that people should really be asking is like, who grew this? Can I meet the grower? Can I vibe them out and see like how
It's
well
like
they're
you
doing
look
in
for
life?
your food that you're eating just regularly. It's the same thing.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
Exactly. And again, like I'm glad you brought that up because the way that I look at life is how we do anything is how we do everything. One of my favorite systems to look at life through is the Hermetic principles. So again, as within, so without, as above, so below. So again, the way I look at cannabis is the same way I look at my food, my water, my friends, my romantic partnership, my hobbies, my passions. I look at it all the same way. I should be treating them with respect and essentially practicing the golden rule. And if I'm around people that live by the golden rule, treat others how you wish to be treated, then my life goes really amazing. If I start hanging out with people that have not learned that yet, then life gets very dysregulated. And so it's up to me to spot that and then do course correction and make sure that I'm around the right people, places, and things. And then I'm operating from that place of autonomy and accountability. Because if I don't do that, then I'm essentially saying that reality happens to me. And I have completely given up my power to be the conscious creator of my reality. And then I'll get this really, really, I don't know, how do I say this? This really tempting thing called the victim mentality, which is basically expecting and thinking that you are a victim to life circumstances, which is what the powers that shouldn't be, aka the negative polarity, wants us to think, because they want us to think that, for instance, when the 1% don't pay taxes, they want us to think, oh, they're just allowed to get away with it. We wouldn't be allowed to, though. But you could use that same energy to figure out what loopholes they're using and then learn them yourself. So again, like the victim mentality is a very tempting thing because it feels much easier when you haven't risen in consciousness yet to just accept, yeah, there's nothing I can do about it. That's what I used to live in when I was back at the dispensary. Oh, this job sucks, but what else am I going to do? Right? That was me being my victim. When I went through my Kundalini awakening, I realized, dude, this is your life. If you don't like the job, no one's keeping you there. It's not even the company's fault. They're doing what they're doing because they bought it for millions of dollars. They are allowed to do that. You need to make a decision. If this isn't in alignment with you, stop complaining about them. Just fucking leave. And when I did that and I started to take that level of accountability, that's how my life truly transformed. And cannabis was a huge aspect of that because it showed me where I had been playing the victim in so many aspects of my life. So it's really interesting, man.
I love that part of the story too, right? Especially when we're talking about, oh yeah, smoking weed, man, like whatever, okay, right? It's like,
Yeah.
no, like you can be lazy on your ass and smoke weed,
Yeah.
right? Or you can use it and to create whatever the reality is that you want. I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's like we talked it's with anything else, but that's why I really appreciate you saying that for that reason, right? It's not it's not good, it's not bad, it's like the canvas is neutral, right? Like, or
Yeah.
like you said, well, I shouldn't say that because I think it's based on the other factors we talked about, the physical factors, what it's grown in, but also who's around it. But
Yeah.
other than that, it's not, it doesn't have an agenda. that it's trying to push on you. It's just growing to grow. Like, I mean, all the plants I can see here, all the ones that I have in the windowsill, they're
Yeah,
growing because that's what they do. They're a plant, right?
exactly.
What you do when you consume it, when you're around it, whatever it is, uh, that you can really take to heart and put to work now.
Yeah. I mean, dude, I'm so glad you mentioned that because think about how many people, and again, for anyone listening, I did this too. Okay. So I'm not calling the pot calling the kettle black over here, but it was something that once I saw it, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. So how many times did I say, oh, cannabis makes me anxious or lazy or paranoid or even happy or ecstatic or whatever? The plant didn't do anything because the plant, like you just called on, is just growing in the ground. It's up to us to pick it, dry it, smoke it, and then actually have an experience. And so when someone says, "Oh, cannabis made me anxious," I like to kind of mess with them a little bit. And I'm like, "Oh, when did the plant hold a gun to your head and force you to connect with it?" Well, no, I mean, I smoked it. It's like, cool. Then you made yourself anxious because you didn't check in with your nervous system to figure out where you were in space time before you actually connected with a mind altering plant. So, are we willing to take accountability for our actions? That's what I mean by taking accountability, and how we do anything is how we do everything. Because if you can learn in the microcosm of your relationship with cannabis to stop scapegoating your unconscious guilt onto the plant and start pointing the finger back at the only person who's actually making your life better or worse, which is you, then everything shifts. And when you learn how to do that in one area, it naturally ripples into every area of your life. You'll naturally start taking more accountability in a romantic partnership, in your business, with your health, with, your friends, with whatever it is in life, because you start realizing, oh, the benefits outweigh the drawbacks of accepting accountability. Yeah, it stings a little bit, but on the other side of that sting is a world of freedom. Versus on the other side, it feels good a little bit, but then literally you wake up 20 years in the exact same spot you were in, wondering, why is this happening to me? It's happening because you didn't stop it from happening. You didn't change anything. So it's very interesting you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up.
Right. I want to touch now more on some of the coaching. Uh,
Mm.
if you want to kind of wherever you want to take that, but I
Hmm.
think it's like kind of sharing like what it is that your coaching looks like because
Yeah.
we've talked like Paul Check, right? Like, so a lot of my listeners know like holistic lifestyle coaching. I've gone through all that. Like, I do a lot of the same things too, as far as like the health coaching, let's call it, right?
Yeah.
But how have you made that your own?
Yeah, great question. So there's two main ways that I do cannabis coaching. One is breathe with cannabis, doing breath work and cannabis together. And one of the cool things there, if any of your listeners like nerding out on this stuff like I do, is that cannabis produces melatonin in the brain, and melatonin acts as a precursor to endogenous DMT, aka DMT that we produce endogenously within ourselves when we breathe. And so when you have more precursor on hand from which to create endogenous DMT with, the translation is a very psychedelic experience. When you add in binaural beats, solfeggio frequencies, and all the things we're using in our tracks that we play during our ceremonies, people have ayahuasca level experiences in the comfort of their own living room in 90 minutes. And then they're back on the ground and they can integrate, they can share at the end of the ceremony. I can give them action steps, I can hold them accountable, and they can go out and prosper. And so that's more of a passive type cannabis coaching appointment, right? It's not passive. We're doing breath work and everything, but we're essentially doing some mindset work beforehand of asking certain journal prompts, one in the sober state, one in an altered state, to kind of give them an awareness of like, oh, wow, this is totally different when I'm altered. I didn't have access to that part of me when I was sober, right? So they're getting more context for what is working against them, what's working for them. But it's more passive in the sense that they're laying down, the experience is happening, and then they're kind of telling me about it after. The other way I do it that's more interactive and more active in general is called story work with cannabis. And what I do for this, and for any coach listening, I'm also hosting a free workshop. I don't know when this comes out. I'm doing a workshop on Monday next week, but this is something that I try to teach all the time. I teach in my Coach with Cannabis certification, and any coach that tries this will exponentially make your clients happier with you because the amount of time, especially for anyone out there that's coaching high level, high ticket clients, those clients are not worried about saving money. They're already making money. They don't really care. They're trying to save time. They're trying to get time back in their lives. And so you can charge very high ticket to allow a client to save a lot of time to get from point A to point B. And so this is how I do it. So remember how I said before, if we are the creator of our reality, then the stories we tell ourselves, all right, unconsciously and consciously, create the experience of reality that we first have internally and then gets projected externally because we're the dreamer here. We're dreaming the dream based on what stories we're telling ourselves. So really, if we can get clear on what stories are working for us and what are working against us, we have all the building blocks to use our wand with conscious power and create the reality we wish to create. And we also have the ability to become a magnet for other people, to latch on to what we're doing and start to learn themselves. And we get to pay it forward that way. And so what I started realizing was, what if I allowed these clients to get their story out on metaphorical paper? Why I say metaphorical is because we usually do it through Zoom and we use a Google document for it. So basically, I would ask you, like, Nick, is there a story right now going on in your life that's either annoying, hurting, or haunting you? Anything like my partner leaves the dishes out and it's really annoying, or something like my pet passed away last month and it's really hurting me, or something like I got cheated on 10 years ago and I haven't been able to be in a romantic relationship ever since, and that's haunting me. Anything like that, okay? And then you would write that out conversationally using complete sentences. All right, you would title it first, like you're going to make a movie out of it, and you would write it out. And then after that, I would ask you, Nick, how did it feel to write that out? You would tell me like, I felt some tension in my chest. So I'll write that down, tension in the chest. What would you rate that feeling? I'd rate it about a 7 right now. Okay, great. We're going to check in on that later. Then I would have you read that story out loud, just the way it sits. And after you read it, I would ask you if any new feelings emerged, if everything stayed the same, did any feelings increase? And I would write that down. Then I would have you go through just a quick 3 breaths together, me and you, just in through the nose, out through the mouth to center in. I would have you set an intention, and then I would have you connect with anywhere from 3 to 5 hits of cannabis. Then we would do about 3 to 5 breaths coming back from that to allow the cannabis to really work through your system. And after about 5-10 minutes, we would come back to that coaching call, and I would have you read that story again, the same way you read it before. But this time, you're going to read it at 70% of your normal rate of speech. And this is going to bring down the nervous system. It's going to downregulate. The way I look at this is almost like most of us, when we're in our beta brainwaves, which is the level of the ego, it's almost like a very cloudy day. The clouds are moving really fast. And if we want to see the sun, we don't need a new sun. We just need to part the clouds so the sun that's always been there can come in. So what cannabis does is it shifts our brainwaves from beta, which are the level of brainwaves that create problems, into alpha and more so theta. Now, theta brainwaves are where the subconscious becomes very open to us, becomes very permeable. This is what hypnotherapy works with. Now, the thing with cannabis is it gets you there rapidly fast, rapidly efficient, and rapidly effectively every single time. Now, from that state, I'm going to have you read it again at that 70%. And then I'm going to check in with you. And this time, you're going to tell me some very interesting stuff. You're going to tell me things such as, it doesn't even feel like I wrote this. Or you're going to start laughing hysterically. Or you might start crying. Anything may happen. All right. And then I'm going to write down when I ask you what happened that time. And now I'm going to have you read it again, 70%. But after each sentence, I'm going to have you put a breath in between to further downregulate the nervous system. All right. And then I'm going to check in with you again. Then the final part of this is we go into what I call mystical translations. So I'll start separating sentences you wrote, and I'll start changing words around in it, having you repeat it the way you wrote it. All right. How does that feel? Then I'll change one or a series of words, have you repeat it back, and I'll ask you, is that more or less accurate? And together, we will create a very accurate rendition of this story. So let's say, for instance, that you had written a story about how, I don't know, your girlfriend in the past cheated on you and it really hurt you, right? And so maybe in there, you have a sentence that says something like, and when she did that, it really hurt me, okay? So I would take that sentence, I would have you repeat, when she did that, it really hurt me. Okay, feel how that feels? All right, cool. Now, what I'm going to cross out she, and I'm going to put an I. When I did that, it really hurt me. And I'm going to say, what does that bring up? And in that state, you're going to be much more able, because you're separate from the story, you're not in the middle of it anymore, to say, yeah, there were a lot of warning signs that I didn't listen to. Like, I knew that this woman was not the best for me. And so, yeah, I kind of hurt myself. I'm like, all right, how does that feel to say? And you're like, really good. And I'm like, why? And you're like, well, because if I knew the signs before and I just didn't listen to them, then really the only issue is, can I listen to them in the future? Can you do that, Nick? Yeah, I can commit to doing that. Okay, great. How do you feel about having a romantic relationship now? It's up to me. Cool. All right, that's a much better story. Now you can move that, and have that move you forward. And now you have a much better ability to go out in the world, find a romantic partner. And if someone cheats on you again, not blame them, Because again, they're just a hurt person hurting people. You don't take it personally. You realize, what can I learn about this? I still wasn't aware of the signs well enough. There's maybe another story working against me of I'm not enough, I don't deserve a good partner. And then we dive into that one. That's a level deeper, right? So again, like this is how you get a lot of coaching done in a very small amount of time. And it is blown away. I mean, I have clients that were like, dude, I spent 10 years in therapy and this one appointment just did more than all that. And again, it's because we're not trying to solve problems from the level of thinking that creates them and then victimizes ourselves from it. We're getting into the part of us that's more divine. We're getting back into the observer spot where we realize these stories didn't even happen. In general, it's all a dream. So if it's just a dream, how do we create the most beautiful dream possible? Well, we love ourselves enough to realize where we've sold ourselves a lie about what's happened to us. All right. So that's an example of how I would coach a client in the story work and mindset type aspect and in Breathe with Cannabis. And they both lead into each other really well as well. And the great thing about this is that let's say you're a business coach, a leadership coach, a relational coach, an AI coach, whatever you are, this bolts on. Because if you're any type of coach, your client is going to have a challenge at some point. And a challenge happens here and gets figured out here. All right. And for anyone just tuning in, I pointed to the beta brainwave and then the theta brainwave level. That's where solutions come from because that's where we realize we've never been separate from God. We're not broken and everything is okay. That's where we know that again. And once we start to entrain ourselves in actually being aware of like, oh, that's where we're getting. Oh, this is what's happening. Now, when we go out in our sober state of reality, that part has more effectiveness at being in the driver's seat. And we start to forget that less and remember it more. And so that's why I think cannabis is so powerful because when you go take 5 grams of mushrooms, and trust me, I love those kind of experiences, but it takes a lot of time to make sense out of all that. There's a lot of distraction, a lot of noise, a lot of jargon. Cannabis is just, you're still fully human. You're just a little bit different perspective. And that little bit shifts everything. And now you don't have to run from your human experience. You run towards it. You run deeper into it. You realize and remember that we're a dreamer having a dream. We're not trying to wake up from the dream necessarily by running from it. We're waking up through running into it because the only way out is through. You know, Jesus and Buddha and these individuals that we hear about creating enlightenment and transcending this universe, they weren't trying to run from reality. They were running towards it. They were running towards it and reminding everyone, hey, you can do this too. And to me, that's real empowerment. So that's how I do coaching with cannabis.
So you have me thinking now, and I've not tried this, but now I'm curious.
Mm.
So, so I'm a physical therapist. I
Yeah.
love manual therapy. Like that's my
Oh, dude.
now.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm going to put a couple prefaces to this, right? I've worked on some friends and some clients even where we've both taken more like 2.5 grams of mushrooms. Like that's the
Mm-hmm.
sweet spot I found where you talked before of like, okay, I'll talk to my soul. Like Paul taught me to do it. Like,
Yeah.
all right, well, I ask the mushrooms for myself, for them, because they might not be quite aware of how to do that. So I'll dose it as such, right?
Yeah.
And started to get into longer, like 2, 3 hour sessions doing that. And actually, I think this was somebody who was on Aubrey's podcast, and I don't
Mm.
remember his name, but he was just on again this week and like a couple
Mm.
months ago. He does like 8, 10, 12 hour like hands-on sessions with
The
people.
rolfing guy, right?
Yeah,
Is it
I mean he's done
rolfing?
rolfing, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
much
it's
more
different.
than
It's called the
rolfing.
reset, I think. But yeah, it
Thank you,
includes
thank you.
aspects
Yeah,
of it. Yeah. Yep.
correct. So I think you see where I'm going with this. Like I haven't used cannabis in that
Oh,
manner. Uh, any experience with this or just recommendations on where to start even because I love doing it sober. I love having the use of mushrooms with it, but I
mm-hmm.
want to see where we talk. Cannabis isn't right for everybody. Mushrooms aren't right for everybody. What
Yeah,
it's all going to depend on the individual,
definitely. The
right?
individual.
So yeah, share with me what your thoughts are on that, please.
Dude, think about it this way. Why is one of the fastest growing workout trends cannabis and yoga, or cannabis and stretching, or even cannabis and weightlifting? Like, think about how many athletes have already found they may have never thought about it, but they just realize when they smoke a joint beforehand, their yoga goes better. They're able to be more in touch with their bodies. Cannabis is a somatic medicine. When it moves you into theta brainwaves, the subconscious's physical manifestation, as Bester Vanderkolk talks about in Body Keeps the Score, the physical manifestation of the subconscious is the body, which is why that famous statement, your issues are in your tissues, is so true. And so while mushrooms and things like that definitely work on a somatic level too, the thing is there's so much other stuff happening that it can be hard to get still enough to really feel into the subtleties of the human body. Whereas with cannabis, cannabis is much faster at being able to get you into an alpha brainwave state specifically, which kind of mixes in with that theta, which is flow state. And so with mushrooms, a lot of the times you're laughing, you're giggling, you're having visions, you're having all this stuff, which is amazing. And those are incredible for different reasons. But I think the reason that cannabis really wins is that it gets you directly into the body, but it also allows you to keep your words. It allows you to keep your stories there. It allows you to keep everything that typically keeps you a human. So you can be more in touch with like, oh yeah, when I move that leg that way with that ankle in that position, I feel something in the back of my skull, tighten up. And that allows you as a practitioner to start to follow that. At the end of the day, I think cannabis for that kind of stuff is one of the best things out there, which is why, again, a lot of MMA fighters also use cannabis. Like it's already out there, just no one's asked the question why, And so one of the other things that I love doing with cannabis that, when I first started my first program, Connect with Cannabis, it was 10 different ceremonial structures. And one of them, and Paul loved this when I told him it, he literally giggled like a school child. It was hilarious. But I told him, he was talking about how, and he literally said this, it was right from my head. He was like, yeah, a lot of guys that I, coach, they can't really feel the energy of Tai Chi. So I get them high first, and then we work through Tai Chi, and they really get it. And I'm like, Paul, that was exactly what allowed me to really experience what Tai Chi was. I would go to this meetup in Boston called Ice and Iron with my buddy Eddie and Jordan and Rob, all Czechies. And they would always start out with Tai Chi. And I was just like, man, this is fucking boring. Like, I'm not feeling anything. So one time I decided to connect with cannabis beforehand. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so I ended up coming up with a modality that I call high chi because it's such a great pun. So I told Paul that, and he was like, "Oh my God, I love that!" in his high pitched voice. And so him and I are actually going to collab on a workshop at some point called High Chi Out of the Rainbow. And he was like, "Can I use that name?" I'm like, "Dude, take it, have fun with it, man. It just came through me. It's not mine to keep." So I mixed this with High Chi, breath work, music therapy, connection exercises. Like one of the best things cannabis is for, like overall, and someone could make a whole business out of this, is relationship coaching. Okay? Because think about what a relationship is all meant to do. A relationship, think about if there's only one dreamer here, all right, and there's 8 billion separate seeming selves out there, even though it's just one person, okay, and now you decide to spend your life with one person. Well, when someone out there is being a little annoying to you, you can go home and kind of forget about it. When your partner is quote unquote being annoying or you're being annoying to your partner, you guys got to go back to the same house. So the opportunity to use a relationship as a mirror to see into the unhealed parts of yourself go up exponentially. But what also goes up exponentially is the ability of you to project your unconscious guilt on someone and not take accountability for it. So what Rachel and I do, and one of the things that's helped us a lot over the last 10 years we've been in the relationship, is when we get into an argument, Rachel has taught me this, but when we get into an argument, I typically want to try to stay like, no, we can figure this out. And she'll be the smart one and be like, we need to take some space. All right, let's just go to our offices, calm down a little while. And then we breathe through it in a sober state. We don't bypass the emotions by connecting with cannabis too early because that's really important. All right, this plant can definitely help soothe you as well. So you want to make sure you work through the emotion and you feel level-headed. Then we come back together and we might say, hey, I'm sorry too. I don't want to argue with you. Okay, let's make a bag and talk about what happened. And now what we'll typically do is I'll ask her, what story were you telling yourself? And she's like, well, I was telling the story that you weren't caring about me and you were being an asshole because of this, this, this. And when I hear it, I'm like, if I was telling myself that story, I'd be mad at me too. Like, I understand why you were upset. And she's like, what story were you telling yourself? And I'm like, well, I was saying that you were annoying and you were pissing me off and blah, blah, blah. And she was like, I get why you were pissed off. And then we started to talk about what actually happened. And in that moment, it's such a beautiful way to come back together and be like, whoa, we just saw a huge way that both of us, both our egos were trying to battle and make each other wrong when in reality it was a blind spot we each had inside of ourselves. And the ability to come back to center and have some amazing makeup sex or whatever is incredible. And it happens so quickly. I grew up with parents that I love them to death, but they argued all the time. I think a lot of us, with boomer parents kind of grew up that way. And so I never knew that was possible. I never knew that fights could be the best part of the day. I mean, when Rach and I have one of these, it's getting weird now. 9 years in, nine and change, we're starting to get almost excited when a fight happens now because we know what's going to happen after. Like there's a little bit of like smirk coming on our face when we go into our office. It's like, all right, we're gonna find something out after this. And so that can be really interesting as well. And so again, at the end of the day, the ability of it to somatically move stuck energy through the body, which then translates to the entire mind, body, and spirit, is incredible. And doing body work, I mean, when I used to get myofascial release massages from this guy that learned the John Barnes method, there was a whole class he would take called unwinding. And so again, like it's pretty much getting your body in strange positions and then emoting and getting rid of like whatever is stored in there. And so cannabis allows the mind to kind of go quiet for a little while so you don't overthink it, so you can more accurately let those things out. Because a lot of us were programmed with these belief systems that men don't cry, you got to be strong. Even for women, I mean, they're much better at this than we are as men, typically being able to express emotion. But even they've been told, like, hey, emotions are too much. And at the end of the day, they're not at all. And they're essential to go through and they're very normal to go through until we start restricting them. And then they start bottling up. And it's like we get emotionally constipated. And, think about it. For anyone listening, if you're constipated, are you a kind person out in the world? Probably not, And so, again, like if we think about, to kind of bring it back to a question you asked a while ago, how do we fix the state of the world right now? All right. With everyone, or so many people rather, living in so much pain, darkness, negative mindset, etc. There isn't just one solution to it. I'm not going to pretend to have it, but I know that a potential component to it could be learning to utilize a plant like cannabis that's already so normalized with over 300 million users that are reported in the entire world. Imagine if those 300 million people went through a storywork session or a breathwork session with cannabis. How would that shift the energy of the planet? I don't know, but I imagine it would be profound. And that's kind of my thing. It's like, I don't know anything really at the end of the day. And I think it's one of the wisest things someone can think. But what I do know is what cannabis has done for me. And if there's only one person here and we're all the same dreamer, then I know the potential it could have in other people if they learn to utilize it in the way it's meant to be utilized. But one of the challenges that I found is that we're operating this plant with no user manual. And we've also had to keep it secret for so long that, of course, we're like winging it at best. And so, of course, we're not going to get it, quote unquote, right, because it's kind of like we're in a car. We've never learned any context of what a car is. So we just think it's a great seat. Oh, we just sit here. And it's like, dude, that thing could drive you to California. You don't even know it has an engine in it. You just sit there and think the steering wheel is a place to put your arms out. All right. That's essentially how most people are using cannabis, not to its full potential, not even a quarter of its potential. So it's very interesting. But yeah, it mixes with the human body movement so amazingly. It's actually insane. It's actually insane. When we do our retreats, like our Breathe with Cannabis retreats, we'll do fitness workshops in the morning. And the way I do it, when people get there is connect with however much cannabis you want, because at the end of the day, I don't believe in the overconsumption addiction model of cannabis. So long as it's leading you closer to your goals and purpose, there is no issue. If it's holding you back, there is an issue, but it has nothing to do with the plant. It's all up to you, And real freedom, if you know about the law of polarity in hermetics, it talks about how a lot of people, let's say, are all or nothing. They're either an addict or they're sober. But what do we learn about polarity? You can't find freedom on either side of polarity. True freedom comes from the middle. True freedom comes from, let's say you were an alcoholic, working through those demons so that now you could even go into a bar room and just go, no, thank you. I don't feel any charge around that. I don't need that in my life. That's what real freedom is. And that's why I'm not a big fan of the typical AA model, because it keeps people in the identity of that which they're looking to leave, which is, hi, I'm Ryan and I'm still an addict, even 10, 20 years later. Where attention goes, energy flows. And so at the end of the day, I think cannabis and many other things, alcohol included and whatever, not that I'm an alcohol user, I honestly hate alcohol, but I'm also going to stick up for it in the sense, alcohol is just a bottle. All right. What we do with it is our doing. And so until we take accountability for that it doesn't have any power over us, we are creating a story that it has power over us. And systems like AA feed that story. And again, if someone out there has had help with AA, all the power to you. It's just not the system for me. So at the end of the day, that's why I teach what I teach about how to break cannabis addiction and all these things and work with the body and do breath work and all this stuff, because it's just really helped me. Yeah.
one comment I want to say on that, right, is I don't think I know any recovering alcoholics that aren't either addicted to cigarettes or sugar or both.
Yeah, yeah,
It,
exactly.
it's just a replacement model.
It's like
Uh,
whack-a-mole. You whack one down, another one pops up.
yeah,
Hmm.
unfortunately, that's again, that's my perception of it. And again, like we said, I'm sure there are plenty of people that have truly healed it out there. But yeah, but it can be for any drug, any whatever, because alcohol, right? It comes down to it was a plant and some water and put it through a process, and now it's alcohol.
Yeah,
It's not doing anything other than what it's there to do.
yeah,
So it's not at fault in any way.
yeah. It's what we do with it. Our actions lead to our consequences. And until we accept that, and again, like I was probably the last person that wanted to accept that because I was a rebel. I identified as a pirate most of my life. But again, like a real rebel or pirate can only exist when they take full accountability. Otherwise, they're just a derelict, at the end of the day. It's a very important distinction. And like you said, again, if someone switches from alcohol where they were going to kill themselves onto sugar, great. It's a huge step in the right direction. Applause. All right. But it's still not freedom. You're still numbing from something that gratefully is not as dangerous. You won't die in your sleep, hopefully, because of it. But at the same time, do you want to keep surviving? I think a lot of us just settle because we've never learned how fucking awesome life can really be. And that's what cannabis reminded me of. It didn't give me it, it reminded me of how I could create that reality for myself. And that's why I'm so passionate around the plant. The plant is a tool. It's not like I obsess over cannabis. I obsess over what cannabis can reteach us about what we've forgotten through the systematized programming that we've been a part of since we've been born, since our parents were born, their grandparents were born. So at the end of the day, it's not that the plant is like, oh my God, my religion is cannabis. It's like, no, my religion is actually, I don't have a religion, but my spiritual practice is learning to utilize tools that help clear the windshield so I can see more clearly. But then when I have that view of the windshield that's clear, I have to do something with it before more bugs get splattered onto the thing. Because I don't want to keep relying on cannabis to clean it every day. All right. But at the end of the day, if I'm utilizing cannabis and I'm integrating what the plant teaches me, and then when I need a new lesson, just like in high school, right? You pass Algebra 1, you can go into Algebra 2. A lot of people have been repeating English 1 for years with cannabis. Oh man, I feel relaxed. Cool. You've discovered that for like 30 years now. What's next? What are you going to discover next? Are you going to discover how you can relax yourself? Are you going to discover how cannabis can help you recreate your entire reality and scope on life? Because that shit's pretty fucking cool too. Yeah.
So Ryan, what is? I've heard stories. I don't know how much of it is real, like historical uses of cannabis, because I don't really believe much history at all anymore
Yeah.
around
His story.
history, right? Like
Mhm.
it's history is written by the winners, so whatever the hell
Yeah.
they said goes. So it's like unless it's like a generation removed and somebody can tell me firsthand, I don't. There's not a lot that I believe.
Yeah. I
Uh,
totally get it.
that being said, what have you learned about the use of cannabis throughout history?
Yeah, great question, man. Because this is something that can really red pill a lot of people. If you look into like the mainstream history around cannabis, what they'll tell you is, oh, people have been using it for textile uses and even as a medicine, but not as a psychedelic, but as like a medicine for joint aches and menstruation cramps. I think it was Queen Victoria the 13th or I don't know, something like that, is famous for using cannabis for menstrual cramps. And don't get me wrong, that's amazing. But the real truth of it is that cannabis has been used as a psychedelic medicine for transformation, healing, and levels of awareness gained for over 10,000 years. And one of the lead historians out there that talks about this stuff is a guy named Chris Bennett. And Chris Bennett has written quite a few books. They're all pretty dense. Okay. So, what I would say for most people is unless you're like naturally a history buff, probably get like a chat GPT summary of it or something. So you can like, unless you're like really passionate around this, you're not going to want to read a book that's like 4 inches thick about cannabis history. But he has a book called Liber 420. And his latest book, Cannabis Lost Sacrament in the Ancient World, tracks cannabis all around the world. And they're now finding residue of hash And they know it's hash because it's mixed with animal dung, which is how it used to be mixed on the Silk Road back about 2,000 years ago. They're finding it in ancient sites in Jerusalem that were the Holy of Holies. So they're finding it in so many areas. They're finding it recently. They dug up a mummy, a skeleton. I'm not exactly sure how to call it, but in China, that this guy was apparently the plug back in the day. He had like 8 ounces of cannabis on him, and they tested it, and it was still high in THC. It was like high for the time, like 5 or 6%.
Yeah.
And so he had cannabis seeds on him, all these things, and he was carbon dated to 2000 something BCE. So then you go even deeper back, you find the Scythians. The Scythians are one of my favorite tribes, and that's actually where my DNA comes from. So hopefully I'm doing them a good service here. But they, when I read about them for the first time, I was like, man, these guys seem rad as hell. You know, what they would do is they would make a makeshift teepee. They would heat hot stones all day on a fire outside. They would dig a pit in the middle of this teepee inside, and they would throw these hot stones in there and dump bales of cannabis on it and close the tent. And it was said that they would laugh like hyenas. So you think that's them trying to cure joint aches with cannabis? Like, no, of course not. You know, it's all across the Silk Road. There's almost never been a time in history, Nick, that humans have not been connected with cannabis until 1937 when the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act occurred. And we can talk about that too and the tomfoolery of that and Reefer Madness. But, you know, a very interesting theory that I've heard proposed by not only Chris Bennett, by some other scientists as well, is that a lot of these disorders like fibromyalgia, IBS, any of these things that are seemingly very challenging to figure out and that we still don't have an answer for are actually a result of clinical endocannabinoid deficiency or dysfunction syndrome, which actually basically means that throughout history, we were interacting with a lot of cannabis, right? We were eating it, hemp, you know, which hemp and cannabis is the same plant. There's no difference except the level of THC. We were interacting with cannabis seeds and we were satiating ourselves with this plant. I mean, hell, even back in the 13 colonies in the US, it was illegal to not grow hemp in the Jamestown colony. So that shows you how beneficial this plant was to society, even only back then, let alone even farther back. So humans have been connecting and co-evolving with cannabis for over 10,000 years. Perfect proof of it, we have an endocannabinoid system. And a lot of people don't realize this, but the phytocannabinoids from the cannabis plant, THC, CBD, etc., fit exactly into the same receptor sites that our own endogenous cannabinoids fit into, which would be anandamide and 2-AG. So the CB1 and CB2 receptor sites, CB1 primarily in the central nervous system, CB2 primarily in the peripheral nervous system, literally have these little receptor sites. And so at the end of the day, the phytocannabinoids perfectly match with those those endocannabinoids that fit in there. That doesn't happen by chance. Show me where we have an alcohol system that works like that. Show me where we have a benzodiazepine system like that. Show me even where we have a opiate system like that. It doesn't happen like that, all right? And so at the end of the day, that shows that cannabis has been co-evolving with us for millennia. Now, all of a sudden in 1937, cannabis and hemp become illegal. Now, a lot has happened, so I'm not saying this is definitely the cause. It's probably multifaceted. But what do we also know about cannabis? It helps cure cancer. It helps cure disease. It helps create homeostasis in the body. That's what the endocannabinoid system entire purpose is to create homeostasis. It takes the nervous system, the autonomic functions, all these different processes in the body, and it hopefully creates a symphony out of them when it's regulated. When it's dysregulated, it creates a very out of key, fucked up symphony. And so again, think about you going to see Beethoven or something live on Broadway and it's all out of tune instruments. How would you feel? You'd be like, oh, that feels weird. Well, that's exactly what our body's doing when our endocannabinoid system is out of whack. Now think about things that can make your endocannabinoid system out of whack and make it clinically deficient. Things like glyphosate, things like fluoride, things like pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, pretty much everything that's being sprayed in the skies, the aluminum, all this stuff is what creates a dysfunctional or a deficient or dysfunctional endocannabinoid system. And so now we plug into that also that cannabis, the one thing that can potentiate and satiate a system that's not producing endocannabinoids, is now taken away from us, and we have no way to correct that imbalance. Now disease, dis-ease, starts emerging from a lack of homeostasis. So again, multifaceted, but definitely an aspect of why I believe health is so fucked up these days. And again, for anyone listening who maybe is like, I don't like cannabis, like, Do I have to interact with it? Well, in a perfect world, you would know a friend that's growing and you would be able to juice the raw cannabis leaves, which have no psychedelic effect whatsoever, but that do satiate your endocannabinoid system, that do help treat and cure cancer, that do help your endocannabinoid system become back into homeostasis, and that allow your body to work the way the body is meant to work. So again, there's almost never been a time in history, Nick, where we haven't been connecting with it, unless you look at the last, I don't know, maybe 90 years or so. And in that 90 years, disease has risen exponentially. Mental health has gone exponentially up. And again, I'm not saying cannabis is the only cure for that, but I'm saying that there's obviously something humanity understood for 9,910 years before that that we are missing today and that has been removed from history. And again, it's not just with cannabis. I mean, other psychedelics too, mushrooms, ayahuasca, all these things are here to help us remember what we've forgotten when we forget it. But we've never had a time in history where there's more things working against us to help us forget, to help us forget the truth of who and what we truly are. And that's why I think the psychedelic renaissance right now is so big, because again, the answers are paradoxically very simple. When you get really high on cannabis, or you are even sober, but you're out in the woods for 3 or 4 days, the answers are so simple. When everything settles inside of you, all of a sudden the world opens back up. But again, simplicity actually feels complex in an overly complex world. We've all been trained that in order to get a job, you got to go to school for 12 years and you got to go back into school for another 4 years. You got to put yourself in debt. To get a car, you have to get a registration. You have to get an inspection sticker. You have to pay excise tax on the car that was already taxed. And then you got to make sure that the money you're making, you're getting taxed. Like, it's complex as fuck. The tax code is this fucking thick, for God's sakes. So when we tell people, smoke a joint and go breathe in nature, they're like, dude, come on, I have a real mental health issue, dude. That's not going to do anything. And it's like, yeah, because you think the answer is going to be you having to go to 18 different doctors, try all these different pharmaceuticals that are based off of natural medicines anyway, because all the pharma industries do is outlaw the natural and monopolize the synthetic. And now that's the world you're in. No, it's got to be more complex than that. It's got to be more complex. We actually have a safety feeling in complexity. But again, that's why psychedelics, I think, are so transformational, because they remind us how simple it is just to be, that we don't have to do anything. We're already enough the way we're existing right now. And I think that's why the establishment tries to beat these things down and or make them legal through only medical applications when you're in a clinical setting under fluorescent lights and a fucking therapist who's never done psychedelics and khakis with a tight belt telling you how to exist. It's like, no, go do it in nature. It's worked the last thousands of years. It's going to be okay now. So again, I know I went on the soapbox a little bit there, but that's the history of it, man. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
When you talk of like you're talking juicing, what give everybody actually a quick rundown on ways to consume cannabis, please.
Yeah. So there's going to be two main ways. There's going to be inhaling and ingesting. So with inhaling, you could smoke. That's what most people are aware of. I like vaporizing. And I'm not talking about the vapor carts. I would not recommend using those, and I'll tell you why in just a second. But I recommend getting something like the Volcano vaporizer or some handheld unit. Storz and Bickel is my favorite company out there. They make the Volcano, which is a medically registered device for cancer patients in Germany. And the kind of little joke that I say all the time is volcanoes are built Ford tough if Fords were truly built Ford tough. Those things will last a lifetime. I have one that's 12 years old, still works amazing, because German engineering doesn't want stuff to break, unlike American, engineering. And so I like vaporizing because number one, it's healthier. Number two, it's more efficient. When you're smoking, let's say you smoke a joint, you capture about 24% of the total cannabinoid and terpene volume. When you're vaporizing, you get up to 94%. So again, when you think about cannabinoids and terpenes, cannabinoids are the gas and brake pedal in your experience. A lot of THC, you're going to go faster. A lot of CBD, you're going to go slower. But you don't know what direction. Up, down, left, right. Terpenes are the steering wheel. So if you see a lot of THC and a lot of terpinolene, you know you're going to go fast in an upregulated state. All right. If you know that you have a lot of THC and a lot of myrcene, it's going to be strong in a relaxing way. If you know that you have limonene, it's going to be strong in a very good sensational kind of way. Limonene is the main terpene I would look into if you're looking to increase your sexual appetite with cannabis. Limonene is fantastic for that. So, again, like I just like going over that little quick cannabinoid, gas pedal, brake pedal, steering wheel thing, because that helps people a lot with that.
Oh,
But
let's
at the
do
end
it.
of the day, those are the two main ways to inhale cannabis, either through smoking or vaporizing. When we look at ingesting, on the other hand, there's maybe two different ways to do that. I mean, there's more, but in terms of ingesting, there's sublingually, which is like a tincture, having it mostly absorbed sublingually through your mucous membrane, which is going to have it hit you quicker. And then undoubtedly some will still get swallowed and bypassed or rather metabolized through your liver. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a faster acting edible. They're actually making instant release things now, which I'm not really sure the science behind that, but very interesting. The science needs to be out there to see. But then the other way would be just traditionally eating it. Now, one of the things that's really important to understand when you ingest cannabis and you have it metabolized by the liver is that it creates a totally different cannabinoid. So it converts delta 9 THC, which is the THC we all know to get us high, into something called 11 hydroxy THC, which is between 1 and 7 times more activating to your CB1 receptor sites. Translation in that science talk, you get much higher, like way higher. And that's why, depending on your metabolization rate of delta 9 and subsequently 11 hydroxy THC, you can either, there's some people that can eat a 100 milligram edible and be like, I don't feel anything. What's everyone talking about? And there's people that can eat a 5 milligram edible and be like, oh my God, I have to hold on for dear life. And, the 100 milligram person could be my girlfriend who weighs 110 pounds soaking wet. And the 5 milligram person is literally me. That's literally me. And I weigh 190 pounds. So it's not really based on weight. It's not based on gender. What I found, very interestingly enough, through my own little research study of the dispensary, is women can naturally handle a lot more cannabis than men. That's just something I find. I don't know why. I didn't make the rules. It's just something where when women come in, they'd be buying 100 milligram lozenges. Men, 10 milligrams on average. Of course, there's always the outliers. But, again, like more often than not, it was women buying these hugely strong edibles. And so there are some other ways. You can do suppositories, right, which is up the rectum, or you can do a vaginal insertion. You can do that as well, and that will also bypass the liver. So it's going to hit you very strong. You can also have it applied through the skin, but it's not going to go down through the subcuticle layer, so it's not going to get you high. But it can produce like localized inflammatory support. So if someone is listening right now and they're like, hey, this all sounds cool, but I don't want to get high, what you're going to be looking into is subcuticle, so like balms and things like that. You're going to be looking into potentially tinctures and everything like that, but hemp full spectrum tinctures that will have a minute amount of THC, but not enough to get you high because, it's really funny, Nick, that we got to have this part of the conversation, but isn't it shocking that when people interact with cannabis in the way nature intended it, it works better? A lot of people are interested in these CBD isolates or THC isolate. That's not going to work as well because when THC is supported by CBD, supported by CBC, CBG, all these different things, they all help each other work better. So when you're looking at hemp products, you always want to look at a full spectrum. So if someone listening to this is like, hey, I'm really focused on health. I want to make sure my endocannabinoid system is working properly, and I want to supplement with some phytocannabinoids, but I don't want to get high. You're looking at full spectrum hemp extracts, tinctures. If you can find a CBD RSO, that's probably the best thing out there because, like I said before, RSO is probably the strongest concentrated form of cannabis on planet Earth. When it's CBD focused, it's not going to get you high, but it will start to protect your body against, a lot of different things and pollutants and things of that nature in the environment. It'll also help your endocannabinoid system get back to full regulation power. And again, your ECS controls your appetite, your sleep, your weight, fluctuations. All these people taking, what is it, GLP-1 or whatever peptide it is. Like, it's just like, dude, there are no free lunches. At the end of the day, like that's a lot of those people. And I'm just going to make a stoner science claim. I can't back this up, but I think a lot of those people that are overweight just have a very deficient endocannabinoid system. Other things I imagine as well, because the ECS is the foundation of everything. But I think that's a big portion of it, because again, if they're getting overly hungry, they're producing too much ghrelin, things like that, that's all related to the ECS. And so supplementing cannabis is not just something for those of us that like the psychedelic effect, it's also something for everyone on planet Earth, in my opinion. That's why cannabis grows everywhere in the world. Like one thing people might not know about cannabis is that a lot of us hear about indica sativa. All right. And really, that's a myth at this point because everything's been hybridized. But there's also a third variety of cannabis called ruderalis. And this is most commonly referred to as autoflowering cannabis. But these genetics were found in places like Siberia, where cannabis modulated itself and co-evolved with the nature around it to produce flowers without light cycle changes. So again, if nature doesn't make mistakes, to quote Jack Cruz, why would this plant be found everywhere in the world? Probably because no matter where you are in the world, it's going to be essential to your health in some way. That's my theory. And again, when you hang out with people that understand cannabis and work with it, and they do it in a way that's not just a stoner archetype way, they're gentler people, they're kinder people, they're also more discerning people, and they're more boundary people, but they're more compassionate. They understand their place in the universe to a deeper degree. This is what I see with the people that I connect with cannabis with, and that's what immediately got me interested in cannabis, way back in the day. When I found that it helped me, I really enjoyed the community because they were asking questions. They were also okay with saying, I don't know the answer to that. And it's challenging to find that without the ego, getting in the way of people needing to know the answers for things and things of that nature. So, yeah, it's very interesting. But those are the main couple of ways that you can intake cannabis. When it comes to juicing, you want specifically a masticating juicer, not a centrifugal, because cannabis leaves don't have a lot of moisture in them. Like you could juice probably 30 leaves and get like maybe a quarter to a half of a shot glass. And man, is that like we're going to be bitter and spicy, okay? So don't tell me I didn't warn you guys, but that's one of the best things you can do for your health is just juice cannabis leaves on the daily. There's actually a video out there that came out in 2011 called Leaf by a guy named Dr. William Courtney. I recommend everyone go watch that because by this point of the conversation, you may believe what I'm saying, but I don't want to be a talking head, and you guys honestly shouldn't believe me, okay? Because if you don't go do the research yourself like I did, you're not going to, first of all, if you go try to tell people about this and they're like, where'd you find that out? You're like, oh, some guy on the internet, right? No one's going to believe you. And also, when you go look this up and you find what I found, you will come to the same conclusion of like, oh, holy shit, this has like totally been psyoped away from us. So in this video, Dr. William Courtney met a woman that had something like 11 different autoimmune disorders. She was on death's doorstep. The medical system had gave up on her. They pretty much checked out, white flag, we don't know what we can do with you. She met Dr. William Courtney and he got her on a juicing protocol. I think she was juicing somewhere between 20 and 30 leaves per day. Within a couple of months, all of her conditions went into remission. And then at the end, they get married and now they do this work together. And so it's a beautiful story. It's like 20 minutes. It's not that long. I pretty much just blew the whole story for you guys, but it's worth watching. Okay. And
Spoiler alert.
yeah, and literally, and again, like go research Rick Simpson, go on PubMed and look up, even though I'm not a fan of centralized systems, like think about it this way, right? There's a guy named Dr. Daniel Amen, and I shit on this guy whenever I possibly have the chance to. I don't shit on him, but I just call him out because he's being a goofball. He's talking about, oh, cannabis is a weapon of mass destruction. I'm like, buddy, I live 20 minutes from something called methadone mile. All right. You want to talk about a weapon of mass destruction? Look at the opiates you're giving out, buddy. Okay. Last I checked, cannabis is never and will never kill anyone because it doesn't get stored in the brainstem. It doesn't deal specifically with breathing and things of that nature, just like opiates do and other things do. People like him should be shamed in public about saying things like that. Because again, that's how humans change their cord. When they realize they've been a fucking idiot and people can call them out with accurate science. And again, at the end of the day, if cannabis was really that bad, how are the Rastas still in existence? How is Jamaica not desolate, right? How did Bob Marley and these people change the world? Now, again, at the end of the day,
You want to talk about psyops and Bob Marley? I mean, there's another one you can go
I
to.
know exactly. Again, at the end of the day, like what I want people to understand, and this is with cannabis, but also just in the world in general. We learned this through the pandemic as well. When someone is on the news or whatever, and they're fat, sick, and unhealthy, trying to tell you this is what health is, don't trust them because the results don't lie. If they really knew what health was, they would look healthy. They'd have a six pack. They'd look ripped. They'd be lean, right? So at the end of the day, when Dr. Daniel Amen is out there talking about cannabis being a weapon of mass destruction, my challenge to him every time is cool. Let's do a pull-up contest and let's do any IQ test and let's see who scores higher. Because in your world, I should be essentially a fucking idiot on paper. And I guarantee that's not what we're going to figure out. So again, a lot of people out there are going to say a lot of things. But again, I'll bring you back to one of the best quotes I've ever heard that Jack Cruz says that I already said, but I'll say again. Does nature make mistakes? Where did this theory and hypothesis and conspiracy theory that somehow natural things that grow on God's green earth are somehow harmful, while at the same time vaccines, synthetic, petroleum-based pharmaceutical drugs, and all these things are somehow safe? Like, guys, read the fucking room. Like, at the end of the day, They don't want you learning that you can grow a plant in your backyard that almost works as a panacea because it interacts with the main system designed to create homeostasis in the human mind, body, and spirit. They don't want you knowing that because when you know that, you don't need their systems. You don't need their pills, and they don't get insurance money, and they don't keep getting richer. So, again, one of the things that cannabis taught me was to look behind the veil and start following the money. Foreign banking cartels run the United States. The pharmaceutical companies run the United States as well, along with the banking cartels. And again, at the end of the day, it is what it is. We don't even need to blame them. Just spot them, see what they're doing, and then choose something different. They've picked their path, and to me, God doesn't mind what path you pick, the Darth Vader path or the Luke Skywalker path. Just pick one and
Oh
be good at
God.
it. So game recognized game. They're really good at what they do. All right. They're really good at psyoping and programming people. So it makes the game actually much more fun because it makes it more challenging for us to get out of. So that's how I choose to look at it to give myself a positive story about it. But I mean, like, come on, guys. They're not even playing a good game anymore. It's so obvious what they're doing now. It's like ridiculous. Like every time I see something in the headlines, does cannabis affect frontal lobe? I'm like, buddy, shut the fuck up. It literally is a non-issue, okay? It really isn't. Again, if someone is being quote unquote a lazy stoner, has nothing to do with cannabis. It's their mindset. It's because they were never taught anything except to be a factory worker in schools, yada, yada, yada. It's a much bigger issue. It has nothing to do with the fucking plant. So crazy, man.
I want to touch on. I had Jack Cruz on about a month ago, right?
Oh, dope.
Two of the things we talked about were cannabis and mushrooms.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was focusing on sort of like um, um, defragging from the. Oh, now I'm drawing a complete blank. Heavy hydrogen, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Yep.
so deuterium, excuse me, right? So he's talking about it from that standpoint, right? So it's like there are all of these, and now when you're talking, he would go on the deuterium route and then talk about what did you just talk about with okay, the overweight, the food cravings, this, that, the other thing. It's like it all fits together. Like it's all
Hmm.
coming together. So like you said, whether it's you talking about it, whether it's what did you say, William Courtney talking about it, whether it's Jack Cruz talking about it, whether like there are all of these places you can go listen, do your own investigation
Exactly.
and try it out for yourself, right? Because that's one of again another Paul Checkism, right? It's like don't listen to me, go try it, right?
Exactly.
That works.
If you ain't assessing, you're guessing. One of my favorite Czech sayings of all time.
So okay, right. One of the things I wanted to ask you, right, as you're talking here, right, kind of going back to that the driving the steering wheel model, right?
Mm,
For me, my life's mantra has become radiate love.
mm. I love that, by the way.
How, thank you.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on connecting to that love space? Whether it's any specific strains
Mm,
that kind of hit for you,
mm,
whether it's uh, that the breathing practice, so the conscious
mm.
breathing practice we talked about, the story work, like where does that radiating love, I think, around the use of cannabis, uh, where does that take you?
Yeah. So are you asking like if I made the intention with cannabis to focus on love, let's say, or divine love or any of these things, how I would do that or where it leads me? Would that be accurate to say?
I think yes, and that's where I'm struggling to almost formulate the question, but
I think I get it though.
right
Yeah.
around that, yes, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is the lifeblood of everything we do. I mean, think about it, right? When we interact with pure, clean spring water out of a river on a mountain, we feel the love there. When we have a home cooked meal from someone that loves us, we feel the love there. Love is the essential ingredient to everything. And I think that it's also the thing that, how do I say this? It's like, what you are seeking is also seeking you. If love is all there is, right? Now, again, we can call love different things. I think some people call it God, some people call it love. I think it's the same thing, honestly. That's how I look at it,
I
interchangeable.
and for like context, like so here's what I love about synchronicities, right?
Yeah.
Like I've written that how many thousand times in my journal at this point, right?
Yeah.
So I just love that you're saying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
dude.
you.
Yeah. And again, like I think when you do psychedelic stuff and you have these experiences that are not mental based, but like they're full on experiences, you kind of realize it's like, oh, the vocal sounds we make don't really matter. We're talking about the same thing. Whether we call it source, God, love, divine love, unconditional love, it's all kind of the same thing to me anyway. But what I would say is that the beauty of cannabis when it comes to love is that cannabis helps us get back to what the nature of reality really is, which you could say is God or love, etc. And the way that I look at life in general is that there's either God, love, etc., or the absence of God, love, etc. That's all there is. So when we see like evil, it's not Satan, it's just the absence of what actually is. It's the absence of everything that is. And so when you're operating from the absence of that, what are you operating in? You're operating in the world of the ego, okay? The seeming separate self. Does that mean the ego is bad? No, it's still neutral. It's just a determining factor or a deciding factor or a dichotomy, if you will, all right, of the absence of what is or the inclusion of what is. And so I think that cannabis, being a part of nature, being a part of the whole, is always going to lead us back there, the same way that grandma's cooking will, the same way that fresh spring water will, as long as we're aware enough to recognize it. So that's the caveat. When we're moving so fast through life, when I moves through so fast through life, I can miss those things. I can miss the synchronicities. I can miss the feeling of my dog looking up at me with puppy dog eyes when I'm high or when I'm sober. I can miss the feeling of Rachel's cooking, my partner, when, she just busted her ass cooking some amazing fucking meal. She cooks the best food. And, I'm maybe rushing through it because I got to get to something. That's me existing in the absence of what is. Again, doesn't make it bad, doesn't make me bad. It just means that I'm forgetting in that moment that, like, hey, the thing you're looking for, the thing you are actually going for by trying to make more money or get more calls, like whatever it is, whatever the thing is actually right in front of you in your food. And I think cannabis is one of the best things I've ever found to help me remember that. But at the same time, I don't want to abuse the feminine because that's also what women do for us men, I think, is like help us remember like the small things in life and to smell the roses and like, let's go plant a garden together. And we're like, oh, fine. And then we get out there and we're like, actually, this is pretty cool, right? Like, I think a lot of us men specifically, and women that are in their masculine too, we kind of forget that. And that's okay. Like the masculine's beautiful too. You go out there, rip some weights, whatever, right? That's fun too. But I think that we're all searching for something. We're all trying to fill a God-sized hole or a love-sized hole. And I think that cannabis, with its down-regulating power and all these kind of things, can kind of just allow us to access it. Because think of it this way, Nick, like we are in a society of instant gratification. We both know meditation's amazing. Like you said earlier, like, yo, I really like that idea of sitting in silence. Every religion pretty much agrees on one thing, which is like go sit in some kind of silence. All right. So we know it's important, but we also know that it can take quite a while. Like if I was to be honest with a client, I would say, hey, make a commitment to go meditate 20 minutes every day minimum and do it for the next 6 months. And sometime in the next 6 months, you may get a little inkling of something that you had forgotten. Now that's true, right? But if I'm going and talking to someone who's used to getting Amazon overnight shipping, and now I'm telling them that
Same
six
day.
months,
Yeah.
yeah, 6 months of something may give them a result, they're just gonna be like, fuck that, dude, I'll go take a pill. So where I think cannabis comes in really handy, and other psychedelics too, is if we talk about the idea of enlightenment or unconditional love or any of these very qualitative things that you can't really see and measure, and where if someone's not in that world already, they might be like, yeah, go smoke another one, dude, or whatever. What if we could be like, hey, do you want to experience what it will be like when you break through a meditation? And then we bring them through a breathe with cannabis, and they're like, holy shit, I felt my parents around me. They died 20 years ago. What the fuck just happened? I'm like, okay, now go meditate for the next 6 months every day, and you're going to start to feel that more. Now they're going to be like, okay, I'm going to go do that because they know it's worth it. They got a sneak peek at the back of the book, if you will, the answers in the back of the book. And I think that's what these things are here for, is to remind us that we are love, right? We're love, essentially paradoxically looking for itself because we've forgotten we're love. And that's hilarious. And that's also what these plants remind us is like, that's fucking hilarious. Like that's a really good game that God's playing with itself here, is that literally the answers are always right in front of us. Literally everything, always in front of us. I have a roof over my head. Like that's loving from the universe. I'm talking to you right now, a rad individual. That's awesome. That's a lot of love. And yet sometimes I can forget those things. And, I think, on a Joe Rogan podcast one time, way back in the day, I forget who it was, but they were talking about ayahuasca and mushrooms and cannabis. And they were talking about like, what do you think God thought when it was creating these plants? And it was like, well, ayahuasca can grow through cement. Same with cannabis. Cannabis grows all over the world. Mushrooms grow from shit. Like, why are these things so hardy? And I remember one of the quotes, and I might butcher it, but it was something like, all right, the monkeys are going to need these, but hopefully they don't eradicate them by the time they really realize they need these. So we're going to need to make them really hardy so they don't eradicate them by the time they realize they're essential to living. And so that's what I essentially think is happening here. I think that right now we're essentially in a very, like, I don't know, tumultuous time, but also a really exciting time. Because I think if the day is darkest before dawn, well, let's be real, with the Epstein list and everything, it's pretty fucking dark out there. And I think dawn is coming. And I think that, decentralization is a big aspect of that, which, again, cannabis is a perfect example of decentralized medicine. It's a little more centralized now, but it's still very decentralized.
It has
Other
aspects of, right.
Yeah, like for years, cannabis was not legal, but people were using it, curing stuff with it, cancer, whatever. That's decentralization. Now it's a little bit more centralized. But again, I think that the more that we take our power back, the more we'll get back to that place of love. And this plant and other plants like it can be a huge support system in that. Only if, though, people stop using it to get out of pain and start using it to run towards God and run towards love and run towards pleasure. Because again, it's the same objective really at the end of the day. But imagine if you're like, I don't want my back to hurt anymore, versus I do want to be able to do a deadlift. It's like it puts your attention where you want your energy and intention to go. And I think that's one of the main aspects I see with cannabis with regards to love and how they connect and everything like that.
You saying basically these plants can grow, well, plants and fungi can just
Mm.
grow through anything, right?
Yeah.
This is now having me think um, the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
Life is a simulation, etc. I still can't get, where even Canvas has allowed me to explore some of this, it still blows my mind because every time I think of Matrix, or I should say simulation, everybody that talks about it makes it seem so digitalized to me.
Yeah, I know, dude. What is that?
This is, and it kind of came up when the way that you said it there, and it's, I don't know, I can't figure this part out, right? Because, all right, I think Hollywood reveals to us a lot more truths in so-called fictional movies
Yeah.
than most people have any concept of.
Mm.
And I'm still trying to explore through meditation, through my Tai Chi ruler practice, through cannabis, through mushrooms, through
Hmm.
ayahuasca, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what that necessarily means. Because I agree that it's a simulation. I think that I am able to project into my mind you on the screen in front of me,
Mm.
the the cacti right next to me, my pen that I've been taking notes with, and I think that you're doing the same thing while we're having this talk, and it's in a biological and physical way. It
Mm.
doesn't seem just zeros and ones and
Yeah.
it's on a computer. So
Yeah.
it's, I still believe to some extent that it is all a simulation because really, if I close my eyes, like I said, going back to the beginning of dreaming that we were talking about almost 2 hours ago, that's still just as real. And it's
Yeah.
just all created in a mind.
Hmm.
But I just don't see it as digital. And I think that's one of the beauties of all these things is they're able to help us get closer to that God and love in some
Yeah.
way, in a way that is not uploaded to a hard drive and just meant to go on in that manner.
The transhumanism movement.
Yes, yes.
Oh, it's just a computer program. Like, I think those people are boring as hell. Like, I would never want to party with those people. Like, what a buzzkill. Like, well, all we're experiencing is just zeros and ones put together. It's like, dude, I think you need to go smoke one, okay? Like, please, for the love of God.
No, you need to go into that teepee that was like full. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's what you
exactly. Like,
need.
you need to megadose,
Yeah.
like straight up. One of the things I have a theory around this that just kind of popped in as a highdeas, which is my official term for downloads that come under the influence of cannabis. I don't have cannabis in me right now. I'm completely sober, but I'm connected with the plant so much it's just part of me now. But I had this theory emerge, which is if we think about, I think it was Plato that said, "Wise is the man who knows he does not know." So if we think about wisdom and knowing, right, those two terms, I think of knowing as more of a, it's 3D, separate Ryan self. Like I can know what the answer to a math problem is, or I can know that my favorite food is pizza. It's not, but I can know those things. But can I ever really know anything objectively? Honestly, I don't believe I can. But a lot of people think they can, and I did for a long time. I always bring up this example. I remember being 13 years old. Talk about God giving you a little bitch smack, but I remember being 13 years old. I was in my parents' driveway with a bunch of my friends, and I was leaning on a bunch of trash cans. And I was arguing with them about why metal music and rock music was better than rap music. And we were going at it. I was getting really pissed. And then the trash cans gave way, and I fell on my ass in front of everyone. So, again, like I remember those kind of times, and I remember the energy I felt. And still, like every once in a while, if Rachel and I get in an argument and I'm trying to prove myself, I know what that energy feels like. It's what David Hawkins would call force, not power. So again, if we think about what wisdom is, on the other hand, wisdom is what happens when you close your eyes and you start to subtract from the equation of yourself. Like a highdeas is what I would consider wisdom. It's something that comes from within and without at the same time, and just boom, hits you. It didn't come from you. And it's not necessarily objective in nature either. It maybe it could be objective. I'm not sure, but in my experience, it's not usually objective. It's more things that you can entertain, you can potentially take on, etc. So if we understand that, right? Knowing is kind of the realm of the ego. Wisdom is maybe something different, like God, source, whatever, right? Well, at the end of the day, how do we know that that quote, wise is the man who knows he does not know, is not evaluating the issue that most of us have, which is that we're trained to think that we're ever going to know things, that there are actual answers to things, right? Which there isn't, okay? There really isn't an answer to anything. There's subjective answers. Like I can have answers for my life, what my favorite food is, what my favorite band is. But again, just because I believe those things and know them to be true, doesn't mean they're going to be true in your world, So we can have paradoxical, the nature of reality is very paradoxical in general. So at the end of the day, wise is the man who knows he does not know, because a man that realizes he's never going to know anything, paradoxically ends up knowing everything. But not through a objective lens, but through a subjective lens, because he remembers he's the dreamer. And so I don't know why that just popped through when you were saying that, and I was like, that's very interesting. But, one way I'd think about this too is that I think that the more you loosen your grip on reality, all right, the more that you're reminded of the beauty of it. The reason I think that so many of these people are like, oh, it's zeros and ones, is because they are white knuckling like crazy. In deep inside, they don't know what the meaning to life is, because they haven't realized there is no inherent meaning to life. It's the meaning you create as the dreamer. So they are white knuckling and trying like fucking hell to get everyone to believe what they believe so they feel safer being alive. And when we look at the world today, why are people trying to push their religion on other people? Why are people trying to push diets on other people? Why are people trying to push anything on other people? Because they're fucking terrified little kids inside that have no idea what the fuck they are, who they are, where they come from, where they're going. And they haven't realized that the more they try to figure that out, the more the grip tightens. The more they surrender, they become everything once again. And paradoxically, as soon as they try to emote it, it starts to go away. That was one of the first things I realized deep in mushrooms was when you crack through. All right, so you're going up like big
You're
doses,
like,
like
hold it
yeah,
on, hold
six,
it
7 grams.
on.
You're like, holy shit, and you're just like, it's just happening to you at that point. Then it breaks and you kind of plateau, and as soon as it plateaus and you start to maybe go a little bit down, at least for me, the Akashic records open fully up, and I have the answer to any question I've ever wanted to ask, but I don't even need to ask it because before I ask it, I already know the answer. And then as soon as I try to be like, hey, Rachel, look as soon as I do that, boom, it all goes away. And so wise is the man who knows he does not know. Like that quote keeps coming back to me because again, when I surrender enough, I know that I am all I need. Everything is perfect. Everyone is, in the same spot where no one dies, nothing real can be threatened. But when I get too boxed into my human reality and the ego's reality, when I stop meditating or don't do my breath work or don't take walks in nature or don't take my dog for a walk in the morning, and now that it's beautiful here in our part of the fucking country where all the flowers are out, sure, I may sneeze a little bit from pollen, but again, like when I forget to even be happy I can sneeze, that I have lungs that work, like, when I forget to look at all those things, yeah, my life gets way worse and I start to tighten my grip and get more fearful. So I don't know why, but that's just what came out of me when you asked that question. But I totally agree. And again, like if I'm to think a very hermetic way, if we're each the creator of our reality, then the people that believe it's zeros and ones, well, abracadabra, it is zeros and ones for them. The people that believe something like you or I do, it comes that. What I would say is be very careful what you choose to believe because you are the one believing it. And I think a world of zeros and ones is fucking boring as shit compared to a world of insane beauty and wisdomful psychedelicness and all this kind of beautiful stuff we do. But again, everyone gets to make that decision for themselves. Their reality isn't worse than ours objectively, but I can say subjectively, I would not want to live in that reality.
Again, it's
Yeah.
still all a version of God in some way.
Yeah, exactly. And God's got to make it interesting, like, if everyone here was similar to who you and I are, it wouldn't be that interesting. And also, a really positive story that I spun up to help me with the dark things that happen in the world. Now, again, I realize the dark things that happen in the world are unhealed aspects of self, but that can get very trippy because, again, where's the line? Like, there was a guy, John DeMartini on Aubrey's podcast a while back that tried to do this type of argument, but he didn't do it that well. Aubrey was basically being like, so kids getting, RA, whatever, there's a purpose for that. And he's like, of course. And I'm like, dude, all right. Yes, if you zoom out, yes, okay, there's non-duality. I get it. I talk about non-duality. But if you're playing a game, like for instance, if you're playing, I don't know, fucking a basketball game with your friend on Xbox, all right? We know that the reality is that game's not real. But when you're playing the game, you're going to pick a team and you're going to try to fight the other team so you can win. That's the point of the game. So I think there's a balance here when it comes to people like Dr. John DeMartini talking to people about how like everything has a purpose. If someone gets, sexually assaulted, there's a reason for that in their soul. Like, okay, I can understand where he's coming from. But also, if I, even knowing that, was to see a woman getting that done to her, I would fucking kill that person. So again, there has to be a level of awareness and reality that you're in, even in this 3D world. But I also think that, again, like, if we can choose to see the fact that it takes a Darth Vader to create a Luke Skywalker, then it helps me place the Bill Gates and Klaus Schwabs and all these people in the world in a way that actually makes them useful for me. And it makes them have some kind of purpose that isn't just a fucking idiot, or an asshole or a dark, negatively polarized Sith Lord, like, and again, that's just the story I architected. So I wasn't haunted by the things that happen in the world. Because let's face it, there's a lot of dark shit out there for any of us that have chosen the path of God and love and, light and all that kind of stuff. It can be pretty damaging to wake up and see all the wars in the world and shit like that. We don't have any power individually to change that. We're working that way if we get together and we keep choosing love and lighting up like lighthouses to remind other people of that. But at the end of the day, how do we reckon with that in ourselves? Well, a way that I did it was just, cast them as a certain character in the story. They're the Darth Vader. Well, Luke Skywalker wouldn't have become Luke Skywalker without the opposing force of Darth Vader to help him rise to the occasion. So I think that the reason we're seeing all this metaphorical darkness out there is because we're rising. And again, when people say the world's worse than ever, it's like, no, the world's just more aware than ever. Like the other day I was going through Facebook and there was did you hear about this meteor that like created a sonic boom they're saying out in this area? So for anyone that's not from the East Coast, it happened in Boston. Rachel heard it. I didn't hear it. She was like, you didn't hear it? I was like, I was blaring Kill Switch Engage in the car. Like I didn't hear shit. Okay. Like, so basically there was this big so-called meteor that entered the atmosphere and made this gigantic like boom sound that like radiated throughout the whole fucking eastern half of the country. People heard it down in South Carolina. It landed apparently in Cape Cod. And the news was basically saying, oh, it was a meteor, whatever. I go into the comments, and this is a mainstream news channel. Not one comment was them being like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Every comment was like, what are they not telling us? They're hiding something. This is totally bullshit. Like, you can see the change. No one is believing shit anymore. The second Trump comes out with something, everyone's like, bullshit. Like, people are skeptical as fuck now. So, again, before that, we were on the polarity of like, oh, like our boomer parents believed fucking everything to a fault. Now this side is almost not believing anything. And I think we're finding the middle ground, once again, because everything's got to balance out according to the law of polarity. So it's very interesting, man. But I'm very excited to be alive in the world we're in today. I think it's a very pivotal time, and I'm very grateful to be here existing at the same time you are. And being able to have great conversations like this is so fucking fun, dude. It's awesome.
So, Ryan, let's I think wrap up our conversation here. That's a great way to do it. Why don't you share with everybody where they can find more about you?
Heck yeah, man. Best place is Instagram at the real Ryan Sprague. I'm not a huge fan of centralized organizations, but for right now, Instagram is still the best that you can, voice note me on. I can voice note you back. Pretty soon, I'm creating a decentralized joint venture network for conscious and spiritual entrepreneurs. And my goal is just like Bitcoin and crypto is decentralizing finance, just like how cannabis is an example of decentralized healthcare and CSAs are a decentralized grocery store, essentially. I think the answer to life is more decentralization because if you had 1,000 different Instagram companies, right? And then Instagram tried to tell me I can't spell cannabis, I would just leave their platform and go to another platform. So decentralization naturally breeds more freedom, whereas centralization, because again, if I want to leave Instagram, it's like tough shit. Where are you going to go? YouTube, same owners. Facebook, same owners. Like, where are you going to go? That's what creates these abilities for these people to take power away from us. So our goal is to create a decentralized joint venture network. We're calling it the Conscious Creator Alliance. When we have that live, I'll let you know about it. We're all going to be in there. But for now, Instagram is the best place. You can click the link in my bio. I have plenty of free workshops I host. Breathe with Cannabis. You can find all the info to that also in the link tree in my bio. Our community has a free level. So if anyone listening wants to hop in there and they're like, this guy with long hair seems cool, but I don't know if I want to pay him money yet. Hop in there. We got a couple recordings you can go through your own time. You get my Conscious Cannabis workbook completely for free as well. And you get to connect with community all around the world just like you. Reach out, message him, do cool stuff together. That's our vision for that project. We also do retreats. We have one coming up in Guatemala in September at our friend's baller ass place down there right on Lake Ataclan. Super dope. And yeah, that's the best way you can reach out to me. Trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah.
That is wonderful, Ryan. I cannot thank you enough.
Uh,
I hope everybody enjoys this. I'm sure that they will. So thank you again.
Hell yeah. Thank you, Nick. Thank you.